I'm sick of you. You're always meeting your classmates or hanging out with your friends. And when my girlfriends invited me, you couldn't even find half an hour to go to a restaurant with me. I tell everyone how serious my relationship with Brian is, but no one's ever seen us together. Not one photo in the paper, just my selfies. And without them, there would be nothing at all, Annie shouted. She was a beautiful girl, the daughter of a local banker, Mr. Clifford. Everyone in town knew him, and many were afraid of him. Brian, however, was not used to being feared. He had grown up in the family of a metropolitan businessman who had put all his assets in his wife's name and become an MP. Now Benjamin was the head of their town, a prominent and powerful man. All the levers of power were in his hands. Brian had been convinced since childhood that no one could harm him, and if there were such daredevils, they were quickly put in their place. One visit to his mother and unwanted classmates would be transferred to a parallel class, and teachers would be replaced by other, more accommodating ones. When Brian met Annie, he knew at once that she was a high society girl. From his circle, she was as spoilt as he was. They had common themes. They had fun together. The first weeks of their relationship were spent in a series of endless hotel room changes, traveling around the city in expensive cars. They went to restaurants, went shopping, fooled around, not afraid to spend large sums of money for their own pleasure. When things settled down, Annie dragged Brian to meet her dad, and that's where the relationship hit a snag. He wasn't in the mood for a serious relationship, but Mr. Clifford was the sort of man who wouldn't be turned down if he asked him to dinner, even people like Brian. Eventually, the formal introduction took place, and Annie didn't meet Brian's parents. They were overjoyed at this union. His father and mother were worried that their son was growing up too spoiled. He'd never been out with anyone for more than a couple of days. Annie, on the other hand, had become their desired daughter-in-law. Except Brian had lost all interest in her. In fact, she too was being selfish and arrogant in the relationship. So they had another argument, and Brian just slammed the door, got in his car, and drove out of town. He wasn't afraid of crashing. His car had the best safety system imaginable. The only thing he was afraid of was being responsible for someone else's death. Despite being spoiled, Brian was not lacking in morals. He never got behind the wheel drunk, preferring to call a taxi. Now, realizing that he had little control over his anger, he deliberately drove out of town to the motorway. There it was possible to squeeze the maximum out of the car without fear of hitting someone. The road was usually deserted. A snowstorm was beginning. Visibility was getting worse. Music was playing in the cabin. Brian's phone rang constantly, but he didn't pick it up. Annie was boring him to no end. He was seriously considering breaking up with her. But how do I tell her father and my parents? They'd already discussed their future marriage and partnership. He would definitely incur the wrath of powerful people. But that was still no reason to marry that silly girl. However, some part of him wanted to stay with her. Whatever he said, he was used to her, attached to her. She wasn't always horrible. Sometimes she turned into a gentle and loving kitten who was ready to fulfill his every wish. Brian imagined his life with and without her. No, he wanted more freedom. At least for now. And she kept calling after another reset. A message appeared on the screen. "I'm breaking up with you, asshole." He was the one who was going to break up with her. Now she was going to tell everyone that Brian had been sent to hell. He pushed harder on the throttle. There was a grimace of anger and disgust on his handsome, chiseled face. "Damn women," he hissed through his teeth and slapped the steering wheel with both hands. At that moment, there was a turn in front of him. Because of the blizzard and the anger in his eyes, Brian hadn't seen the warning sign, and now he was flying straight for the cliff. He spun the steering wheel, hit the brakes, but it was too late. The car skidded off the track and went tumbling downhill. The airbag deployed, but Brian wasn't wearing his seatbelt. So the first flip caused him to bump painfully, and the glass for a moment. He felt like everything was happening in slow motion. The impact with the glass was so hard that the glass seemed to burst, or his head. It's unclear. Then the car started rolling downhill at breakneck speed. Brian was thrown around the cabin. He closed his eyes. When was it over? Inside, he smelled blood. His first thought, "I'm dead." His second, "No, it doesn't hurt that much when you die, I guess." He tried to move. His leg hurt badly. Nausea. Everything was blurry in his eyes. A feeling of dread was growing in his chest. Brian thought about calling the rescue team, but he couldn't find a phone. "We need to get out." The problem with Annie suddenly seemed like nothing at all. He pressed the button and the glass slowly crept down. It worked. Brian climbed out, got to his feet, and immediately threw up. It kept snowing, and his jacket was too light for this cold. He ran out of the house, not paying attention to the weather as he usually did. When all you have to do is walk from your car to the office, there's no point in dressing warm. The ravine his car came off of was deep. Brian, in his expensive shoes, tried to get up, climbing up, but each time he slipped and fell, hitting his hands painfully on the frozen ground. The cold brought him to his senses. The shock was wearing off. The car was smoking, lying on its roof. It was dangerous and scary to be near it. Brian wanted to find a mobile phone inside the cabin to call the rescue team, but he was afraid to go inside. The only thing left to do was to walk through the woods. Slowly staggering, he walked through the low, bare trees. The uneven ground beneath his feet made him lose his balance. There were sticks sticking out everywhere. In some places, the growth was so thick that it was difficult to get through. Branches scratched his face. After an hour of walking, Brian was cold and tired. The forest was uphill, and he had no idea which way to go, what to do. Stumbling, he fell into a small hole. His strength left him and he blacked out for a while. When Brian opened his eyes, he saw the muzzle of a she-wolf above him. She was licking his cheek. Nearby were her wolf cubs. "This is it. I'm about to be eaten," ran through his head. There was no sense of fear. At that moment, he was too weakened to be afraid. The cold had taken the last of his strength. Suddenly, voices were heard behind him. "Hey, over there lies one. Look." Brian looked up. The she-wolf growled, covering the wolves. Brian flinched. "Don't be afraid. She won't hurt you," said one of the 3 kids. "She's tame. Mom rescued her, fed her. She lives with us and sometimes goes into the woods to protect us," said the second child. They were wearing snowshoes. They must have lived nearby. Brian looked at the boys and squinted. They all looked the same. He thought he was imagining it all from the shock. But soon a woman appeared above him. She had blonde hair, brown eyes with huge lashes, and a very piercing stare. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," Brian replied. For some reason, he wished he didn't look weak in her eyes. He tried to get up. It was difficult. "Come on, I'll take a look at you. And we'll call an ambulance if we need to. Our house isn't far from here." Brian followed her and the kids in silence, glancing warily at the she-wolf who followed them until they were out of the woods. Near the house, Brian lost consciousness. He woke up inside. "I'm sorry you had to carry me," he said. "What happened to you?" the same pretty stranger asked. 3 boys were sitting on the couch across the room, looking at Brian curiously. "Are there really 3 of them? Or am I just having a stroke?" he asked quietly. "Who?" "There's no one here," the landlady said seriously. Brian jumped up, afraid he was hallucinating. The boys laughed out loud, as did the stranger, who was standing next to a mug of some kind of potion. "Drink it. It'll make you feel better," she said. "My name is Amanda. And these are my children, the twins Gregory, Harold and Harry. So, you're not having visions, but you may have a concussion." "Are you a doctor?" Brian asked. He suddenly realized he had his head bandaged. "Oh, don't worry, I treated the wounds. I'm a nurse by training, but I have to moonlight as a vet. Everyone in the village needs help. Nobody wants to come here. It's a beautiful place, though." Brian caught himself thinking he couldn't take his eyes off that woman. She's young. She's not wearing any makeup. She's completely different from the fashionistas Brian's used to. What would happen if he saw one in town? She'd lose on all counts because there's nothing artificial about her. She's real. That's all there is to it. Amanda tells him she's 27 and has lived here for 5 years. As soon as the boys were born, she moved out on her common-law husband, John. He didn't want kids. And when he found out Amanda was having triplets, he insisted on an abortion. She refused and left. Her husband came to apologies, saying he would bring up the kids. Relationships improved, but only until the children were born. There were too many worries, and John couldn't take it anymore. He started drinking, bringing friends home. He was a hooligan and often came to the attention of the police for fighting and drinking. Amanda put up with it until John raised his hand to her. After that, she packed her bags and left. The children's father yelled at her that if she filed for child support, he'd find her. But Amanda had only one wish: to have nothing to do with this man. At that moment, she said that she couldn't stay in the city because she had no money to rent a place to live. It was hard to live alone with her 3 sons, and Amanda made the decision to move out of town. Her grandfather was a forester and left behind a cabin. That's where she and the boys were headed when she found Brian in that hole. "Wait, what about your parents? Didn't they take you and your grandchildren in?" he asked. "They're dead. They were geologists when I was very young. My grandparents raised me in a village 4 kilometers from here. They have their own house, left over from my grandmother. This is my grandfather's house. He built it with his own hands to look after the forest. I can't imagine living in the woods. I don't know how you live in the city. Concrete everywhere, neighbors here, neighbors there, car smoke, noise, and everyone's in a hurry. The flat is like a box of people, and there's no yard of your own. Brian laughed. That's the first time I've ever heard that. Wow, it's true. How did you end up here? I had a fight with my girlfriend and got into an accident. Amanda took her mobile phone out of her back pocket and handed it to Brian. They're probably worried about you. Call your family. Brian thought for a second. Will they be worried about him? Probably not. Dad's only going to be worried about not having a partnership with Mr. Clifford when he finds out about everything. No, I shouldn't. I'm hardly going to be remembered. Difficult relationships with loved ones? Amanda asked. Brian smiled and nodded. It was getting awkward. She'd probably give a lot to have a family, and here he was complaining about a difficult relationship. They sat and chatted for a long time. Brian had the feeling that they were old friends. She seemed to understand him in everything, to feel him. His head still ached, but her potion made him feel better. He was warm and relaxed, and he began to drift off to sleep, but he didn't want her to leave. Soon the children began to yawn. It was getting dark outside the window. Amanda went to tuck them in. Brian wanted to wait for her so he could talk to her some more. Before this meeting, he had thought he had a full, busy life, with plenty of friends around, but that wasn't the case. None of them were really listening to him. With these thoughts, Brian drifted unnoticed into sleep. He dreamed of the she-wolf. He dreamed he was falling off a cliff. When he opened his eyes, he saw her face in front of him. She was looking at him seriously. Brian smiled, but his romantic mood was interrupted by a voice that sounded painfully familiar. Didn't you have the sense to call an ambulance, sweetheart? It was his father. Brian jumped to his feet. How do you talk to her? She saved my life. Brian burst out and staggered backwards. He felt dizzy and a little nauseous. Let's get in the car. Benjamin didn't even bother to take off his shoes at the door. Brian felt terribly ashamed of his father. I'm sorry, please. Give me a rag, I'll clean up after him, Brian said. It's okay. Go get better, Amanda smiled demurely. Brian had no choice but to get dressed and leave. He got into the car with his father, and he immediately stepped on the gas. Annie told me what you've done, you rascal. Said she was worried about you. And the phone's not available. Good thing I was able to track your car. It's beyond repair, by the way. But they promised to pay the insurance. Brian shook his head. Your son almost died, and all you think about is insurance. He'd have to be poor. Yeah, Benjamin could afford dozens of these cars. I'm not going back to Annie, Brian said. Don't be daft. Buy her a more expensive bouquet and she'll forgive you. I don't know why she loves you, you fool. Dad, can't you hear me? I'm not going back to her. I don't love her, he said every word, because it seemed that his father didn't hear him or didn't want to hear him. Do you know that an alliance with Mr. Clifford will bring us great prospects? That's why you've got to put your pride aside now, son, and play it cool. I'll do the deal, and after that you can file for divorce. You're out of your mind. I won't use Annie like that. Are you afraid of Mr. Clifford? You're right to be. Except you should have thought of that before. It's too late now. The conversation had reached an impasse, but it didn't end there. At home, it happened again. His head was splitting and his father was shouting at him, threatening to deprive him of everything. He just couldn't argue. Stop it. Our son almost died, his mother interceded. She called the family doctor to the house, and he put Brian on a drip. He spent the whole day in bed. The next day, his mother took him to the hospital to have him checked out, an MRI scan, blood tests. The doctor said all was not well. It was a serious blow. There was also a cracked leg and multiple bruises. The blood tests didn't look good either. Brian wasn't living the healthiest lifestyle. The doctors prescribed him a diet and told him to abstain from alcohol and cigarettes. Brian shrugged. All his thoughts were there, in the little house at the edge of the woods. Towards evening, he made plans to go to Amanda's house. The pretext was gratitude. The reason was to see her, to help her, to be near her. Something about her had him hooked. Or where are you going? Annie came into his room. She was flawlessly beautiful, bright makeup, black hair, manicure, expensive clothes and jewelry. Brian smiled, remembering how simple and attractive Amanda had been compared to this painted doll. None of your business, he retorted. How rude. I heard you almost crashed because of me. I came to apologize. I had no idea you cared so much about me. Let's forget the whole thing. She came over and hung round his neck. But Brian pushed her away. The smell of her perfume made him feel sick. Annie, it's over between us. I just lost control of the car yesterday. Don't get any ideas. She was in shock. Apparently she'd never been dumped before. You promised to marry me, she whispered, confused. And you promised not to throw tantrums. You see, we're both not perfect. I don't think you want someone around who doesn't love you. But you do love me. I'm sure I do, Annie said. Brian shook his head. And where does she get of being so sure of herself? No, I don't, and I probably didn't. Was infatuated like you. But we're not right for each other. I'm sorry for everything. And let's part without a scene. Brian walked over and kissed her forehead. 2 tears fell from the beauty's eyes. But I love you. I don't think so. I wanted to say that she loved only herself, because she only cared about herself. She came and didn't even recognize his well-being after the accident. Is that love? Brian got in the car, started the engine. This car was his old car. He'd learned to drive it around town when he was 18, but it was in running condition. He'd been wanting to sell it for a long time, but he'd never got round to it. And now it's coming in handy. On his way to the shop, he bought some toys for the kids, bought groceries. She'd hardly take the money, and it was a bit early for flowers. Brian drove to the cabin in the woods. All the way there, he was plagued by fears. What if he drove off the motorway again? He certainly wouldn't survive in this car. He knocked on the window. No one came out. He peered through the shoddy wooden fence and realized there was no one inside. There was a heavy lock on the door. No, the kids are at the neighbor's, Mrs. Helen. She's missing, said a man passing by. He was carrying a hunting rifle, a dead hare in his other hand. Missing how? Brian wondered. Just like that. She went to get a loan yesterday and disappeared. Mrs. Helen has the children, but she can't keep them with her for long. So we went to the police, but they said it was too early. 3 days. Then they said we'd start looking. Brian went to his neighbor's house. The boys came running out to meet him. Uncle Brian, hello. How's your head? One of them asked. Brian smiled. Now that's caring. Incredibly touching, sweet and genuine. Okay, how are you guys doing? Any sign of Mom? They're looking, sighed one of the twins. Don't worry, they'll find her. The other pushed him in the shoulder. Of course they will. Don't worry. Brian was approached by his grandmother. Who are you? She asked. Sort of nothing. She saved me. I was in a car accident and she helped me out of the woods. I came to thank her. You can't thank her for something like that, but I could use your help right now. I'm old now. 3 grandchildren of my own. I can't keep the kids with me much longer. And even if I could, who'd give them to me? They'll come from the service as soon as 3 days have passed and take them away. If you want to thank me, help me find her. Maybe you know someone in the police force. Amanda's a good, decent person. It's a shame about the kids. Brian dropped off some toys and groceries. He said he'd come round again. He dialed his dad's number a few times on the way home to ask him to help find Amanda. He had connections everywhere. He didn't pick up. When Brian got home, the family council was waiting for him. Why didn't you answer? He asked. Sit down. We need to talk, his father shouted. Next, Brian heard what he'd been dreading, an ultimatum. Mr. Clifford found out that Brian's son had dared to abandon his precious little girl. He was furious. Benjamin promised to talk to his son. He hoped to patch things up, but Brian refused. Am I too poor to have the luxury of a love marriage? Money isn't everything. I don't love her. I don't even like her. She's empty-headed. So what? You should have thought of that before. Why were you seeing her all this time? And who brought up the wedding? Yes, you did. You meet someone to see if they're right for you. If you turn her down, you'll embarrass me, and I'll take everything away from you. No money, no car, no card. You'll go to work as a janitor. How's that? Brian put everything in his pockets on the table. He took the expensive gold watch off his wrist and left the room in silence. Later, he went to see his father again. I can live on what I earn myself. And if I have to, I'll leave your company. But I need some help. The girl is in trouble. She's missing. Can you get anything through your channels? She's got 3 kids at home, and there's no one else to help if she's not found. I'd like to take the kids in for a while. We need to help her. Is that the aunt who got you out? Benjamin frowned. Yes, her name is Amanda. No, you know I don't care, right? You're on your own. You're your own man. You make your own decisions. Since you've damaged my reputation, humiliated me in the eyes of my partner, who's also my constituent, then find your own Amanda. As you treat me, I'll treat you. Brian didn't know what to do. Eventually, he went to the police station himself, but they wouldn't give him any information. Only when he gave his surname did the station officer make a call and said that they would start looking for the woman the next day. The children would not be given to him. In any case, even if his father comes to ask for them, there are rules and laws that can't be easily circumvented. A week later, Brian visited the 3 boys at the orphanage. Amanda was wanted, and the children had been taken away. He visited them every day, bringing them sweets and asking how they were doing. At their request, he even went to feed the she-wolf once. She still growled at him, scaring the hell out of him, but she took the food. His father never turned from anger to mercy, but he left his son to work for his company. But now it belonged to his wife, Brian's mother. Politicians aren't allowed to run their own businesses, but that's just a formality. Benjamin did not hide from the voters that he continues to help his wife in the management of the company, which he himself founded long ago. People loved him, apparently not knowing what he was like off camera. Brian tried to take the kids back to his house, but was predictably turned down. A couple more days later, their birth father took them in. That's what Brian was told at the orphanage where he went to visit the boys. They didn't give him an address or phone number, of course, but he knew he could find out for himself. But what was the point? What difference would it make? Amanda hadn't been found and he wouldn't be able to take the boys anyway, but he could at least keep an eye on them. That terrible evening, Brian came home late. He was feeding the she-wolf, who no longer hissed at him. Her cubs were tame too. He could pet them now, she allowed it. At home, however, Brian was in for another unpleasant surprise. "Annie, why are you here?" he asked dryly, sensing trouble. "To tell her I'm pregnant." He raised his eyebrows. "It can't be. I've always been careful. You've never had a misfire, remember? And you used protection. But that's not a guarantee. It's still a possibility. So you do whatever you want. I just thought I'd be honest to tell you. That's all." She walked past him, but she stayed in the doorway. "If you don't want to get married, I don't want this baby. I'll have an abortion. But I'm not just going to leave it to you. Everyone will know what kind of man you are, and your father's reputation will be ruined when people realize what a monster Benjamin has raised." Brian sighed heavily. He stared out the window at the snow for a long time. There was nowhere to go. Amanda was gone. The kids had been taken away. What did he have to lose? It wasn't the child's fault that his father didn't love his mother. It's not the kid's fault that his father doesn't love his mother. He rang to say he was ready to marry her. Annie rushed over immediately. It was awkward. Brian could barely hide his disgust. "You'll get used to it," he pounded in his temples. "You get used to everything." A month passed. Brian never came to see the boys again. He'd learnt the address, but for some reason he didn't dare go into a strange man's house and ask about his children. But he thought of Amanda often. Annie was sick of his coldness, but Brian told her bluntly, "You don't demand of me what I don't have in me. I'm with you for the baby. But I promise to treat you well. Who knows where this will lead? Maybe we'll be happy, maybe we won't, but we'll give it a try." Annie nodded. She was in love with him. On hearing of the impending wedding and pregnancy, her older brother Joshua had returned from America. He was a businessman, the most arrogant of their family, incredibly spoiled, haughty. Joshua made no secret of the fact that he didn't see Brian as a good boyfriend for his favorite little sister. "If you hurt her, they'll find her in the wolf pit," Joshua told him. Then, of course, he smiled and hugged him, saying it was a joke, but with a hint. And Brian thought, "I've been found in a wolf pit before, and it was still better than marrying your sister." His father was happy. The son had taken to his wits. He gave him back all his credit cards and apologized. "That if we break up tomorrow, will you take it back? I don't want that. I can live without your money," Brian said proudly. "No, son, I really was wrong. I've been looking for a reason to talk to you and settle this. You see, God sent you and Annie this child. I've wanted grandchildren for so long, you know that." As soon as Brian had his gold credit card in his hands, the first thing he did was hire a private investigator to look for Amanda. That same day, he went to the flat where her sons now lived. "I'm from social services." "Hello, I'm here to see the kids," he said from the door. The door was opened by a drunk man with 3 days stubble. "Sorry, a little drunk. You know, it's the weekend, but the kids are home, fed and well fed. Come in." And Brian came in. The house was a mess. It was smoky. The boys had locked themselves in a room. When Brian came in, one of them was already hanging by the window on the sheets, trying to get down. "Uncle Brian's here. Pick us up, please pick us up. Daddy beats us. He's not feeding us." Brian rushed to the window and pulled one of the twins out, dragging him into the room. "Third floor. Are you out of your mind?" He was outraged. "What are we supposed to do if we're locked up in here?" "They are ungrateful. They're lying," the father said weakly. Brian was furious, but he couldn't get out of character. "So I'm taking the children and pray to all the gods you know that you don't go to jail for negligence. A child could be dead right now. What if I hadn't come in? Or don't you care?" There's 3 of them. One more, one less." The father glared at Brian in silence. "Yeah," he admitted, "he took us to get benefits," one of the boys said. "That's all. He doesn't need us. Just the booze," one of the twins said. Brian told the kids to pack up. "Where are you taking them now?" the father asked. "Not your concern. Don't go anywhere near here again, or we'll take you to court. A petition to deprive you of parental rights will be sent today." If that drunk had the sense to ask for ID, but Brian was lucky. He gave him a good scare and took the kids. They got in the car, and soon Brian drove them home. What do you mean?" Dad asked on the doorstep. "You wanted grandchildren. Here are grandchildren for you. I'll adopt them. They are the children of the woman who saved me in the forest. If she is not found, they will stay here forever. I've made that decision. That's the way it's going to be." The father was dumbfounded. Mother was too. But Brian was so determined that they were afraid to say a word against him. That evening, when the boys were full and watching TV in the guest room, where Brian had brought a sofa from the living room to accommodate everyone, his mother approached him. "Tell me everything," she asked. And Brian told her about the fight with Annie, how his car had flipped over and how his life had turned upside down a few hours later. "I can't help it. I can't stop thinking about her. I'm ashamed to admit it. But if Amanda hadn't gone missing, I wouldn't have agreed to marry Annie even, though she threatened to get rid of the baby. My boy has finally fallen in love." Mom gently ran her hand over his cheek. He smiled. "So will you help me?" "Of course I'll look after them. Except it'll be hard to break up afterwards. The detective said there's little chance of finding her alive, and I won't give them up." "What if she's alive and you find her, and she takes the babies?" "Brian, that would hurt. I mean, we're all instantly drawn to them. I've never seen babies so cute and so exactly the same on the face." Brian grinned. Yeah, he'd grown quite attached to them himself. "Anyway, I'm never going to leave them. I'll help them. Their own father doesn't need them. I have some connections. I'll help you with the adoption. The only thing is, what's Annie gonna say?" "I don't care. I'll talk to her, of course, but her vote doesn't make a difference. If she wants to leave, let her leave." Annie, of course, took the news badly. She made a row, told her father. He rang Brian after listening to his future son-in-law. Mr. Clifford said, I like you. You have character. I'll tell my daughter I respect your decision. Give her a month to submit to you." Brian shook hands with Mr. Clifford. It was the first time they had spoken so warmly. Joshua was the only one who took his sister's position and wasn't too lazy to speak up about it. "That's my decision," Brian said dryly. Joshua made a silly joke and walked out. It was obvious that he was high, smoking something. He'd taken illicit drugs, drank, but he could recover, and sometimes he'd quit for a week, and then he'd relapse and quit again. His father told him that if he ever embarrassed him, he would disinherit him and kick him out of the house. And that was serious in Brian's family. If Mr. Clifford said something, he would keep his word to the end, not change it. Joshua understood that well. The boys started going to school, which was located near Brian's house. Mom drove them and picked them up. The father didn't approach the children at first, but he couldn't help but be fascinated by them. They were wonderful and reminded Brian so much of his mom. The man he'd hired to find Amanda didn't contact him until a week later. No news yet, he stated. Then he disappeared again. Annie insisted that Brian move in with her and leave the kids at his parents' house. "When once we're married, we need to start living together," she said. Brian realized that was the way it should be. Okay, let me stay with you sometimes. Let's start with that. You're such a wuss. Are you scared? Scared of me? Crawling out from under Mum's skirt, Annie screamed. Brian put her tantrums down to pregnancy, but realized she'd been like this before, always. I've got 3 orphans at home I swore I wouldn't abandon. You care more about this woodland girl than me. A scarecrow, I suppose Annie said arrogantly. Brian was instantly seething. Shut your mouth, you idiot. She saved me and she's probably dead. You talk about her like that again, you'll be in trouble. Is that clear? He was so pissed off, he wanted to punch her. But Brian, of course, never did that to a woman. And of course he held back so he could do something to help Amanda's search. He decided to talk to the kids again. The detective's string had broken at the point where Amanda had left the shuttle bus that had brought her into town. You don't remember anything about where your mom was going? To the bank, the boys answered. Did she say anything else? Maybe she wanted to go somewhere else, or at least discussed which bank she was going to. She was going to the Bear Bank, answered one of the brothers. Yeah, that's right. There was a picture of a bear, said the other. Brian got up, went to his bedroom, and brought the children a booklet of the bank. That bear? The kids nodded. In his hands was a leaflet of the bank that belonged to his future wife Annie's family. It was Mr. Clifford's bank. Brian could now do his own investigation and decided to start with the sketched cameras. But as it turned out, they were switched off at the time. Does this sort of thing happen a lot around here, he asked. The bank's security manager knew Brian by sight, but he wasn't in the mood to give him that kind of information. Is the boss aware that you're interrogating me? That's when Joshua joined them. What's the problem? Brian told him he was looking for a missing woman and showed him her picture. Now her pictures were plastered all over the city. They'd been looking for her for a long time. No, I haven't seen her like that, Joshua said indifferently. Brian showed the pictures to a few other bank employees, and they recognized her. Yeah, they gave her the money. She had 3 kids, I think, but she got good benefits, worked as a medic or a teacher. I don't remember exactly. But I do remember Joshua went to see her off in person. I thought he liked the client, the young bank employee said. Brian sighed. Why did he lie? Or was he involved in Amanda's disappearance? More information was needed. Brian decided to do a search while no one was home. He knew Annie was going to the doctor and Joshua would be at work. Mr. Clifford in general was always on the road and never home. So Brian quietly entered with his key and found some very interesting documents in Joshua's desk. A huge promissory note with exactly $560,000 written out of the sum. That's the money Amanda had received at the bank. Apparently that's why he killed her, for the money. He was afraid to tell his dad. He'd have told him for sure. Brian did some more digging and found a hospital certificate in Joshua's desk. It was Annie's note. What was her document doing in his desk? Apparently she'd given it away for safekeeping, not pregnant. A what? What? Brian read it again. The date was fresh, just before she'd come in and said she was expecting his child. So that was a lie too. He clutched his head. He'd fallen for the old trick. But now the truth set him free. He only wished she was in jail. Brian took the promissory note home, photocopied it, saved it wherever he could. Got ready, switched on the tape recorder. He met Joshua on the front porch of the bank. He often went out for a smoke. You know, I learned something interesting, Brian said. Well done, you've learnt your ABCs. Cheap jokes were part of the man's nature. I know you owe money, and I found out who you owe it to. I know why. And I've learned that you recently repaid some of it with the money of the very woman I'm looking for. Joshua, where is she? What have you done with her? Joshua glanced round quickly and stepped right up to Brian, his eyes flashing madly. Just say the word, and I'll have you for it. I know where I'm going to bury your soul. It's over there in the woods at kilometer 30. If you want, take it back and give it a proper burial, but don't come to me. If anyone finds out, you're dead. I won't kill you right away because my sister loves you very much. You take care of her, you hear? Brian nodded. By pretending to be scared, he got everything he wanted. So he just turned around and walked away. He got calmly into his car and went to the police station. There he gave all the materials, and a couple of hours later he was already standing in the woods at kilometer 30. It was not far from the place where he himself went off the road. He was shivering from the cold and the fear of seeing her dead. He'd only seen her once before. Then that very day, the scariest day of his life and the most beautiful because he had met her. The rescuers found the hole, but it was empty. So there were traces of blood, said one of the operatives. It was already dark. They were working with torches. If she was here, she's gone. Tomorrow we'll sweep the area. We'll ask the villagers, but it's too late for tonight. Let's wrap it all up, their chief commanded. My heart was not in place. A wolf appeared from the forest. At first Brian was frightened, backed away, but then he recognized her. Her mates, the wolf cubs, were nearby. There were fewer of them. Sad, but that's life. He approached her, and she ran into the woods. Brian stopped. The she-wolf turned round too, as if expecting him to follow. And he realized that the she-wolf was calling him to follow her. They walked through the forest for a long time, their feet wet again. There was no path, and it was terribly hard to walk. He remembered the last time he had walked through this forest, just like that, only then his eyes had been double-visioned. Now he had his phone in his hands and a relatively warm jacket. The she-wolf led him to the village about 2 hours later, when Brian was about to call the rescuers. It would be terribly embarrassing to say. I followed the she-wolf into the woods and got lost. Get me out, please. The she-wolf ran up to the outermost cabin and stopped. The she-wolf was there too. You say she's here or something? Do they feed you here? Why did you bring me here? She looked at him with tenderness and concern. Brian smiled, knocked on the window. Who else is out so late? Came the voice of some granny. Brian thought that if that granny was going to shoot salt up his arse now, she'd be right. He'd never said anything more delusional in his life. Excuse me, I'm looking for a woman named Amanda. She's missing. The she-wolf brought me to you. Come on, and came from inside the house. Brian walked through the snowdrifts, pushed open the heavy gate, and found himself in the yard. He climbed the creaky steps and followed his full-bodied grandmother into her old hut. Inside it smelled of bitter herbs. I am a healer, a hermit. I have lived alone since my grandfather died. I had a daughter who died when she was young, and I began to heal people. God gave me that gift when he took her away. I collect herbs, sell them. A woman often comes to see me from the city. Did you see the woman? Brian asked impatiently, realizing that the lonely grandmother was about to tell him her whole biography. A wolf came at me and did not bite me, but licked my feet, saying, "Follow me somewhere." So I followed her. I saw a woman lying in the ditch, covered with earth. The she-wolf had dug her up halfway. She was still breathing. Her head was covered in blood. When I dragged her home, I tore all my veins. I think she's asleep, but go and wake her up. It's not every day she has visitors. She's got a bad headache. She can't remember anything, and at night she screams terribly. She even refused to go to the hospital and asked to stay with me until she remembers what happened to her. They probably wanted to kill her. Brian walked into the room and saw Amanda. She was sleeping quietly. Her face was as beautiful as ever. Her blonde hair fell carelessly on the pillow. He walked over to her. Amanda jumped to her feet. Shh, shh, it's me. You don't remember me? Brian asked. Brian, she said, how are you here? He took her hands in his and smiled. God, I saw you, and it's like I'm back to myself now. I remember everything like it was yesterday. It's calm. I've got the kids, they're fine. I took them and went to look for you. They talked for a long time. And then Brian thanked Granny. He gave her some money as a token of his gratitude. He and Amanda got dressed and went outside. It's a long walk to my car. That's okay. I feel like walking. Brian followed in his own footsteps. The she-wolf followed, and Amanda kept saying all the way how much she missed her sons. She revealed that Joshua was a bank employee, and she confided in him. He assured her that he drove all customers who took more than $500,000 home for safety reasons. She didn't want to wait too long for the bus, and it was a bit scary to go with that amount of money. Amanda took the money to renovate the house. She needed to buy a lot of things. Fix the roof. Joshua was polite the whole way, and then he stopped the car and told her to get out. She realized he wanted to kill her. She tried to run away, but Joshua caught up and hit her. She couldn't remember the first few days well, when she was rescued by Lillian's grandmother. Brian told her how he'd been looking for her, how he'd taken Amanda's ex's children away from her. When she heard that, she said she'd nail him, and they talked again as if they'd known each other all their lives. By the roadside, where Brian's car was parked, they spotted a silhouette. Brian wondered who could be guarding them on a snowy motorway at this hour. There you are. I've been waiting for you. You don't seem to understand me. Brian, I told you I'd find you anywhere. My sister's been tracking your movements. Did you know that? She has an app on her phone. Joshua was standing there with a gun. Amanda backed up and Brian covered her with his back. Run, he whispered softly. Don't move. I'll shoot as soon as either of you move. Don't hurt her. Brian couldn't bear the thought of the children never seeing their mom again. After all they'd been through, it had to end like this. The sound of a car in the distance. Should I scream, call for help? What if the bastard shot him and Amanda and a bystander? Couldn't risk it. Joshua was coming right at them. I want you to get to the pit. I was out of ammo last time, my apologies. But you're not getting out of here this time, he said to Amanda, gesturing for them both to walk back into the woods. The car slowed down nearby, and soon Brian heard Annie's voice. Don't touch him. Stop. She was running towards them on her heels with her light overcoat open. Her long black hair fluttered in the wind. Joshua cursed. Sis, God knows I didn't mean for it to come to this. Joshua, no, you can't. That's how he'll put me away. It's either me or him. It's your choice. Joshua stood in front of the wolf pit. Brian and Amanda were at the very edge of it, holding on to each other, and Annie had caught up with them, apparently having tracked them down. It's your choice. You kill him, you kill me, she stood in front of Brian, covering him with herself. Joshua continued to hold the gun in his hand, but that hand was trembling now. What are you doing? Do you really care about him more than me? You can see he's cheating on you. And he came here for that thing. Look, he's holding the hand of someone else, not you. Back off, Joshua said. No, shoot your sister. Go ahead, shoot or leave. You can get out of the country in time. You haven't killed anyone yet. It'll all be sorted out. Go or shoot. She looked her brother in the eye, and Joshua felt his hand tremble more and more. He adored his little sister, would have killed for her. Even just pointing a gun in her direction was unbearable for him. But behind him stood Brian and the one he hadn't finished. Last time they're gonna put him in jail for sure. Joshua was burning with hopelessness. Something had to be done. He pushed Annie aside and pointed the gun at Brian at that moment. The she-wolf clawed fiercely at his arm. She wasn't trained for this. She just knew what to do. A shot rang out. The bullet flew past. The gun fell out of Joshua's hand. The she-wolf threw herself at him, and he screamed and took cover. Annie cried, afraid to approach. Brian and Amanda watched indifferently as their protector punished Joshua for what he deserved. Brian wouldn't let her gnaw on the poor guy. Annie shouldn't have seen such a thing. She had saved him, and it would be too cruel to do that to her. Amanda commanded, You can't. Leave him. We'll take it from here. And the she-wolf moved away from Joshua, growling angrily in his direction. Brian had the gun a long time ago. Brian tied Joshua's hands with his belt. Making sure there were no other weapons in his clothes, he led him to the car. Annie followed. She didn't say a word. Brian called the police. Tell me what happened, she asked. Do I have a choice? Annie was scared. Brian stopped her in front of the car. Thank you. She looked into his eyes. You know it already. Yeah, I saw Joshua's certificate. Why did you lie to me about being pregnant? Brian asked and instantly realized how awful it was. But wasn't it obvious? Annie said nothing, went to her car and slammed the door loudly. Joshua had been badly mauled by a she-wolf. He ended up in the hospital with a dozen stitches. Annie testified against her brother, though Mr. Clifford was adamantly opposed. She refused to attend the trial, but she told all that had happened. She never spoke to Brian. Joshua was given 3 years in general prison, given the best defense lawyers and the fact that he hadn't killed anyone. Mr. Clifford was furious. After hearing all about it, Benjamin himself severed all business relations with the failed matchmaker. That day, when Brian brought Amanda home at 2 a.m., she immediately rushed to the children, couldn't wait till morning. Woke them up. They were crying with happiness, hugging their mom. Mom, Dad, this is Amanda, and she's going to live here with me, Brian said. Amanda immediately tugged his arm. We didn't discuss that. What do you mean, staying here? It's how the kids go to school here. We have wonderful homeschooling teachers in the village. How can I leave the forest? Brian's parents watched Brian and Amanda's first argument with curiosity. You know what, Amanda, I just want to say that I don't know you at all. And the last time I came to your house to pick up my son, I was rude to you. But I've gotten to know your sons, and I'm ashamed to say I can't imagine my life without them. I don't know how things will work out with my son, but I'd like to be in the twins' lives. Have you baptized them? I could be a godparent. Amanda shook her head. I was just about to. Yes, Amanda, while you were away, we became terribly attached to the babies. I'd really like you to come live with us. but I realized it might be difficult. Amanda was confused. After all the events after the deposition, at 2 in the morning, this conversation was completely inappropriate. How could she stay to live in someone else's house with what were essentially strangers? "Let's continue this tomorrow," Amanda said. "I've only just got my memory back. I still need to see a doctor." The next day, Brian brought her breakfast in bed. She was embarrassed, and he admitted that he thought about her all the time. The kids got ready for school and didn't want to leave their mom's side for a long time. "Did you buy them new clothes?" she asked. "We didn't go round to your house. There's a castle there." They're very obedient. They nurture each other, help each other. They fight all the time, but if anything, they stand up for each other. They got a good reception at school. Harry's already got a crush on a girl called Chris. I've learned to tell them apart. Amanda, I realize this is also rambling, but I really just can't be without you guys anymore. And if you decide to go to your own house, can I be godfather too? Just to have an excuse to come over once in a while. She laughed. Your daddy will be the godfather. Well, then I'll be godmother. She laughed again, and Brian took her hand. That's what was missing from his relationship with Annie, that tenderness, that swooning feeling in his chest when he touched her hand. No amount of money could buy that. Brian took Amanda to the hospital. The doctor insisted she undergo a full examination. You have the same injury as Brian. Exactly the same, she simply stated. You need treatment and mandatory observation. Brain injuries are no joke. There are consequences. I'll bring her back here when I need to come, Brian said. In a fortnight. In the meantime, I'll prescribe some medication. Take them. Amanda, don't skip them. If you have anxiety or sleep disturbances, I can prescribe those. Amanda nodded. And I do, but I don't want to take pills. I'll take herbs. Herbs. Herbs are herbs. But if it gets worse, don't delay. Don't hesitate. After the hospital, Amanda asked me to take her home to the village. She fed the she-wolf, got her things, and went with Brian. Pulling the children out of the life they were used to would be cruel, and it would be terribly awkward to live with strangers. Amanda decided she'd get a job here. If the twins don't want to go back, there's still a school here. In the village, just a visiting teacher. It's different. She didn't want to take away something that had become dear to them during this time. A month later, when Joshua was sentenced, Brian learnt the bad news. Mr. Clifford had decided to buy back the houses in the village where Amanda's house stood. The deal had been signed. An ecologically clean plot of land with incredibly beautiful nature, where people lived for years, was being prepared for demolition. A recycling plant was to be built there. Amanda was terribly upset. Brian went to see Mr. Clifford to talk and try to persuade him to take another site. There's nature there. I know the area. It's almost a conservation area. There's even a tame she-wolf living there, and there's bound to be some rare animals. There's plenty of other places. I'll help you find them. My dad and I can help you make a deal. Please think about it. Brian was naive. Do you know why I chose these places? Mr. Clifford replied. My son Joshua, the one you put in jail, told me your girls have a house there. Said he was going to come out and burn the whole village down. I thought I'd make it nice. We'll just tear the place down, and the wolf that tore up my son's face and hands will be destroyed. I'm going to flatten the whole place, okay? I chose this for a reason. This is my revenge on you, and be thankful it's what it is. I could have done a lot worse. Yeah, I don't want to get my hands dirty on you. Brian was devastated. Brian's father tried to get the deal annulled, but Mr. Clifford had made it with a man from the capital. Everything had been bought there. All he could do was throw up his hands and say there was nothing to be done. Brian didn't give up. He went to rallies, got people together, got the public's attention. All this caused a resonance, but the project was still not stopped. The struggle continued for 6 months, until the bitter news came. Brian was on the road. He was traveling to the capital to try to stop the plant being built. He got a call from his mom. Brian, here's the thing. Dad's gone. Benjamin died at work. Heart attack. The doctors couldn't save him. The funeral was an ordeal. The twins cried, for Uncle Benjamin had managed to become their godfather. Mr. Clifford appeared at the funeral, defiantly spat on the grave of the former head of the city and left. After the death of his father, Brian had no chance of winning the case. He had to put all his energy into making sure he didn't lose his dad's business. But even here, Mr. Clifford did his best. He sent a little man to the company, who slipped a slightly altered document for his signature. After Brian signed it, the police raided the office. They put him in jail. The firm was thoroughly investigated. Of course, it couldn't have been perfect. The media, with Mr. Clifford's encouragement, made a sensation out of it. The former mayor was labeled a fraud. His name was besmirched, and Brian went to jail. Amanda, on the other hand, was always there for him. She supported Brian's mom, who was in a terrible state after her husband left. Amanda came to see Brian every day before the trial and said, "I love you and I won't leave you. Even if you get a life sentence, I will wait for you. My life is happy because I have you, and this is nothing. I won't get much, but I can't ask you to wait. And you don't have to," Brian replied. "I'm with you forever, like that she-wolf." The walls between them grew apart. Brian got 3 years, but the sentence was soon to be suspended, given the array of extenuating circumstances. And if Mr. Clifford hadn't interfered in the trial, he wouldn't have been jailed at all. The case of the forced relocation of the villagers moved slowly but surely. That evening, Mr. Clifford came to the village to personally promise all the villagers better conditions. In exchange for their nice little houses, they were offered cozy flats in the town center, but they all refused to leave. The houses were recognized as damaged. Resettlement was a matter of time. After hearing the villagers curse at him, Mr. Clifford, angry, was driving home on the motorway at the very spot where Brian had driven off the road and his son had nearly killed Maddie. He had a flat tire. There was no spare, as luck would have it. No car was ever coming through here. I mean, he'd fenced the area himself with signs. He was going to start building the plant by demolishing the woodland at the edge of the track. Mr. Clifford wanted to call the road service, but the phone in this place didn't pick up a signal. There was no connection. Suddenly, wolves came out of the woods right at him. Mr. Clifford moved far away from his car in search of communication. He could not get to it in time. They surrounded him. Frightened, the man rushed into the woods. The wolves chased him, but did not touch him. Next to them was their mother, the tame she-wolf. They drove Mr. Clifford into the swamp and wouldn't let him out. The water was very cold. He thought he would get to the other side and get away, but he couldn't. Those places were too marshy, and even experienced hunters avoided them that night. Mr. Clifford remained there forever, in that forest which he himself had condemned to demolition. He became a part of it forever. For his remains will never be found, and that's a secret only the wolf cubs will ever know. His mom couldn't run the business on her own after her husband went missing. Her brother tried to escape from prison. Apparently, after watching the films, he got a little extra time. With Mr. Clifford gone, Joshua was completely defenseless. Annie had to take a job in her profession. She became a rank-and-file employee at someone else's firm. When their bank went bankrupt, the spoilt girl had a hard time adapting to the usual conditions of life. She and her brother hardly ever spoke to each other. Meanwhile, Amanda was the most frequent visitor to the prison where her husband was serving time. She and Brian got married while he was behind bars, and soon Amanda became pregnant. Given this circumstance, Brian's sentence was suspended and he got out. Brian's mother received the entire inheritance after the death of her husband. She skillfully managed to manage the money and founded the company again. Of course, the turnover was much lower. It was only a small local company, but everyone in town knew their name. Despite Mr. Clifford's intrigues, they still had connections in town, still had friends. Benjamin had helped a lot of people in his lifetime, and now they were repaying him by helping his widow with her business. Brian became a right-hand man and managed to double the capital. Amanda, on the other hand, delighted everyone right on New Year's Eve by announcing that she was pregnant again. "I wonder if you'll have 3 again," joked her mother-in-law. "I don't think so. I don't think it's likely to happen twice." "Although anything could happen," Amanda replied. And soon Brian had a daughter, beautiful Gloria. Seeing a rich woman throwing away a baby pram, a beggar decided to take it for herself. And as soon as she opened P4, Sandra scrutinized the woman's face on the laptop screen. It so happened that the search engine had accidentally given her an article about this Tiffany, the founder of a charity fund to help children in difficult situations, left without parents or brought up in very poor families. A mature, well-groomed woman, kind look, open smile, stylish, so energetic. Sandra couldn't take her eyes off her face. She gazed, remembering was she or wasn't she. It looked like she was. She couldn't be sure. After all, Sandra had seen her only once in her life almost 15 years ago. And yet some inner feeling told her that this was the woman who had once played such a big role in the fate of their family. What would have happened to them all if it hadn't been for Tiffany? Or was it not her after all? Sandra ran her eyes over the article once again. It talked about Tiffany's life. She was quite happy now as she had finally found her true calling. The woman helps children and considers it her life's work. Tiffany had even taken in 3 babies from an orphanage, the kind that everyone else had given up on. They had health and behavioral problems, but now they were well-adjusted teenagers, 2 girls and a boy. They posed for pictures with their foster mother, beautiful, dressed up, smiling, and just 10 years ago, no one would have given them a chance. Tiffany proved by her own example that the impossible is possible. The main thing is love, faith in children, and willingness to work long and hard. Not everyone can do that, of course. Tiffany is rich. Her husband is a big businessman, the owner of a famous chain of petrol stations. And she's achieved a lot herself. For many years, she worked as a stockbroker and managed to make a fortune. In an interview, Tiffany admitted that she used to consider her career as the main thing in her life, and money was not even the main motivator. No, Tiffany grew up in a fairly wealthy family and has never known want. Sandra read this article on the internet like a fascinating book, holding her breath. It seemed that Tiffany was the guardian angel and savior of their family. Everything fit together with amazing accuracy. It was just that the work fascinated her, enthralled her, completely inspired her. It was kind of like an interesting game that a woman would give herself over to. And then everything changed. Tiffany was in her early 40s at the time. She started thinking about having kids. And that's when it became clear that it wasn't that simple. Sandra pulled away from the screen, leaned back in her chair, and sighed heavily. The memories came back to her in slow waves. Heavy memories of the past. She had been on the verge of despair then. Sandra couldn't cope with the hardships that had been thrust upon her. Nothing good seemed to lie ahead of her. The hopeless misery of survival. Sandra, then very young and inexperienced, did not want to wake up in the morning because what good could another day bring her? A terrible state of mind. She had never experienced anything like it before or since. Sandra's life hadn't been spoiled at all. She was born into a very poor family. Her mom worked as a cleaner. Her dad worked odd jobs wherever he could. Both of them were uneducated. They finished 9 grades and didn't go on to further studies. Then somehow they met and started living together. As far as Sandra knew, her parents weren't even married. The 3 of them lived in an old wooden building on the outskirts of town in a former barrack. The family had a small flat there, or rather, they rented it with their own corner. Sandra's father and mother never got their own place. They were both quite happy with that life. If one of the spouses managed to earn more money, there was a party with drinking, cheerful neighbors, dancing, talking until morning, and sometimes fights. On such days, Sandra bought cheap sweets from the nearest shop, stale gingerbread, chocolates with nuts, soda in tin cans. The little girl felt almost happy. But the truth is, fear always came afterwards. The drunken guests of her parents, many of them instilled fear in Sandra. Sometimes she even did not sleep at night, listening to the sounds in the kitchen. Until now, the girl thought that everyone lived the same way she did. Sandra did not go to kindergarten. From the age of 3, she was left alone at home while her parents worked or went for a walk somewhere. She even liked it. She could play wherever she wanted and make as much noise as she wanted. No one reprimanded her or calmed her down. Sandra had many friends in the yard. The girl knew them from birth. They were the children of the very neighbors with whom her parents were so closely associated. These boys and girls grew up just like Sandra herself. It was a rough neighborhood. That's how everyone lived. And then it was time to go to school. And it was there that Sandra realized how different her own life was from that of many other children. Her classmates had beautiful new bags and clean clothes. They brought beautiful toys to school, discussed computer games and trips to the sea. Sandra felt like she was in another world. At first, the children tried to stay away from the unkempt Sandra. The girl wore an old dress with worn orange shoulders, inherited from one of the neighbors. The little girl was very out of place, and Sandra herself was in no hurry to get close to her classmates, who were like aliens to her. But Sandra looked closely at these girls and boys. She understood a lot about this life by looking at them, and tried hard to fit in with this alien, but so attractive world. Sandra learned to keep her things in her workplace in order. Around her small desk there could be chaos, empty bottles, some rags, rubbish, but the desk itself was perfectly clean. The girl began to ask her parents for new things, albeit cheap, but from the shop, not from someone else's shoulder. Sometimes she even managed to persuade her parents to buy. And Sandra also tried very hard to study hard. True, with this was trouble. The girl honestly crammed all the rules in the textbook and memorized the formulas, but still made mistakes in words and examples. And physics and chemistry remained for her an incomprehensible science. Sandra was frustrated, but she didn't give up. She studied diligently and studied hard. Teachers saw it and praised her for her diligence. Even overestimated hard-working Sandra, encouraged as they could. But Sandra realized that she would not make a scientist, and so would like to become an economist or lawyer, to work in the office, to walk in a beautiful blouse and a narrow skirt, and be sure to wear high-heeled shoes. But the girl was very mature for her years and realistically looked at things. She knew that she would not reach university, but she would definitely get a specialized secondary education. Teachers helped the diligent student, drew her a good certificate. Thanks to this, Sandra entered college as a pastry chef. The profession seemed to her suitable, in demand, useful. "You'll never go hungry," her mother approved of her daughter's choice. Her father was gone by that time. He had died a year earlier from poor quality alcohol. Mother, by the way, also briefly survived the spouse. When Sandra was studying in the second year, her mother, drunk, fell asleep in the cold and froze to death. Sandra that night was preparing for exams because it was a winter session and did not suspect anything. She thought that her mother, as always, would stay the night where she was walking, but she decided to return home. So very young Sandra, who was barely 18 years old, was left alone. It was good to be an adult, or she would have had to go to an orphanage. Sandra suffered the death of her parents, no matter how they were, but still loved her, and in their own way took care of her daughter, never beat, never humiliated. And the fact that sometimes they were indifferent, so they themselves had such a childhood. No one had taught them how to bring up children properly. But the girl did not have to worry long. Life itself did not give. She now had to think about how to provide for herself. No, Sandra had been working a little bit by little for a long time. She cleaned the floors instead of her mother or her shift worker, or substituted for a saleswoman in a local shop for a few hours. But now Sandra needed a lot more money because she had to pay rent, take the bus to college every day, and eat. So Sandra got a job as an assistant in the school canteen. The job was hard in every sense. She had to carry heavy pots and pans from place to place all day long. After the shift, Sandra felt as exhausted as a lemon. And what was there to study for? Of course, the girl could not combine work and college. She was soon expelled. Sandra cried then from despair, injustice, and impossibility to change anything. Wow, she tried so hard to make it in the people, and in the end repeats the fate of her parents, also left without education. But Sandra will definitely not drink. And she will have a family of her own, with a caring, hard-working husband who will take care of her. Maybe she will have time to finish her studies. Who knows how life will turn out? Sandra dreamed of having a family. She was tired of living alone. She wanted to have a reliable man to rely on. But the local boys were not suitable for a life partner. They were firmly following in their parents' footsteps, and it was obvious. Looking at the peers with whom she grew up, Sandra wondered, do not they realize that they need to somehow get away from such a fate, at least try to fix something? But they didn't seem to see anything special in their way of life. Everything suited them. They felt quite happy, got together, had children and split up, had fun parties with fights and long conversations about nothing. Just like their parents. Sandra had been invited once, but she'd always refused. "Why are you ruining my reputation, you smart ass? You've got a bad temper, looking down on everyone," Cynthia, a neighborhood girl and once Sandra's closest friend, complained. Cynthia didn't work. Why should she? She already had a young son for whom she received a good amount of child support. I wish she had child support from the father. But the trouble was, he didn't work. Cynthia often invited Sandra to visit. The girl refused. She knew exactly what went on behind the flat doors, the same thing that had once happened in her own home. Partying, meaningless conversations, and fights. Sometimes Sandra wondered, I wonder why I turned out so different. Perhaps it would have been easier for her if she had turned out like everyone else. But no, Sandra longed for something different. She realized that she needed to move somewhere else first. Otherwise, she would never get out of this quagmire. but she was desperately short of money. And then Sandra met Scott by chance. The girl was returning from another shift, tired, could hardly move her legs. She sat down to rest on a bench, bought an ice cream. She spent the whole day in the canteen, where they had a terrible heat. I wanted to cool down at least a little. It was the middle of May, and the weather was quite summer-like. It was quiet, calm, and beautiful in the park. Dressed-up people were walking along the paths. Pleasant music was coming from the speakers. I didn't want to go home to my barracks. There were parties behind the wall, poverty and hopelessness all around. Those people in the park probably don't realize that there is another world out there. They think it's just as beautiful and clean everywhere else. Happy. Why are you sad? There was a voice. A young man sat down on the bench. He was pleasant, with an open smile, kind dark eyes, charming dimples on his cheeks, and slightly disheveled brown hair. I was walking in the park, not touching anyone, and then suddenly such an amazing phenomenon, a beautiful girl on a bench, alone, very beautiful and very sad. It's not right. Sandra smiled. A cute guy called her beautiful. Great. That even gave her goosebumps running down her back. Not at all like the greasy compliments of Sandra's neighbors. But what kind of beauty is she? She's just ordinary. Just ordinary. What's he doing here? Jason the stranger introduced himself. May I ask your name? I don't mean to be insolent or intrusive. Just so I can address you in some way. You don't mind, do you? Sandra. The girl smiled, a little embarrassed. She wondered what would happen next. Jason wasn't repulsive, he wasn't tense. On the contrary, he had a way about him. His smile was warm, kind, sincere. They sat on that bench for a long time, talking about everything, telling each other about themselves, and gradually growing closer, becoming almost kin. Jason, too, had been left without parents. He had been raised by his aunt, his maternal sister. He didn't know his father, and his mother had died when he was barely 5 years old. A very young woman was let down by a sick heart. So little Jason ended up in his aunt's family. She was not too happy about the extra mouth in the house, but did not put out. However, she could not surround her nephew with love and care. Jason understood this fact, and was grateful to his aunt for not sending him to an orphanage. It's better than growing up among strangers, he reasoned, but it's family, I guess. Sandra shook her head. Jason might be right, but his aunt was still too indifferent and aloof. Sandra's mother and father certainly loved her in their own way and cared for her daughter as best they could. Jason, it turns out, knew no parental affection or love at all. After completing 9th grade, Jason enrolled in technical school and began studying to be a welder, but never finished his training because he needed to work. Feeding an 18-year-old forehead wasn't something his aunt was going to do. I have raised you to adulthood. I have fulfilled my duty, decided this strict woman on the birthday of my nephew. Now be kind to start your own life, to move out. It's time for you to move out. So the guy had to hurriedly finish the driver's course and get a job at the base of the factory. Sandra even gasped when she heard that. How similar to her own story. She couldn't finish her studies either. That's why she had to support herself. She was just a little bit away from graduation, but she had to get a job. I'm grateful to my aunt for doing that, Jason smiled. But I'm only 20 now, and I'm a fully independent person. My peers are still on their parents' backs, and I'm my own boss. Jason rented a flat in a good neighborhood, and he managed to find a good job. He drove for the head of a big factory. The pay was pretty good. It was enough to live on, and even have some fun. Jason and Sandra had never been apart since that memorable evening. First they met, went on dates. The guy was always coming up with something new. They walked around the old city center, looking at unusual buildings, or sat in cafes. They would go to cafes, places the girl didn't even know existed, or something else. After only a month, Jason suggested that Sandra move in with him. She gladly accepted. Why, it's even more profitable to rent one flat instead of two. Besides, she had wanted to leave her barracks for a long time. Jason was kind, caring, sensitive. He was exactly the kind of man Sandra had always dreamed of having around. He could do everything: cook, make repairs, and handle money. Handy, responsible, economical. Most importantly, he loved Sandra very much. The girl felt it. Of course, she loved Jason too. And the young people felt really happy then. There were so many good things ahead of them. It seemed to both of them that they would succeed together. It was no coincidence that fate had brought together two people with such similar stories and the same outlook on life. Jason worked as a driver. Sandra continued to work in the school canteen. Now she would come home, happily buy something tasty on the way to make dinner for her lover, and wait for him to come home from work. They married a month after they started living together. That's how quickly things developed for them. They didn't have a big wedding. What's the point? No extra money. There were no relatives who would need all this festive action. It was better to buy something for the house. We celebrated together in a restaurant. We had a lovely time. Jason looked at Sandra with serious eyes and said he would do anything for their family. We'd be happy, we'd have children, and they'd be happy for us. I'd do anything, Sandra recalled. And Jason did try to keep that promise. He worked hard. He was given bonuses, which he put aside for future housing. The couple had a shared dream of getting their own flat, and they were on their way to it. Both, of course, realized that the fulfillment of this desire is still far away. But nothing, not all at once, slowly. Jason and Sandra decided not to rush into having children. Both thought that first they needed to earn their own corner. The couple wanted their baby to have a happy, carefree childhood. Not like theirs. But fate, as it seems, has a plan for everything. One day Sandra realized she was expecting a baby. She had a sort of epiphany one morning. It was too early to suspect anything, but Sandra was suddenly struck by the thought that a baby was already living and developing inside her. At first, Sandra waved away these conjectures. Then she took a test 2 stripes. There could be no doubt. Well, the mother-to-be was hardly surprised. She could feel everything. At that time, Sandra had no idea that at the same time a complete stranger to her, who would soon play a huge role in the life of their young family, was also rejoicing at the positive test. Jason was happy to hear the news, picked up the young wife Sandra in his arms and spun her around the room. The father-to-be hugged his beloved so tightly that it was even difficult for her to breathe. "Wow. I was afraid to tell you. I thought you would be upset," smiled Sandra, looking at the shining husband. "Why is that?" He was surprised. "Well, we wanted our own flat first to get on our feet, and then. We planned everything completely differently, but for some reason I'm incredibly happy." "This is the best news I've ever heard in my entire life," Jason agreed. Sandra smiled. Jason is so good. She was just now getting used to having someone like that around. The best, the nicest man on the whole planet. And he loves her. What a blessing it is. The young couple began to prepare for the arrival of an heir. Sandra was transferred to a lighter job. She was no longer allowed to carry pans and her salary was reduced. But Jason started taking part-time jobs. During the day he drove his boss around, and in the evenings he used a lorry to deliver materials to the sites. He did what he could to raise more money for the baby's birth. "Our baby should have everything we need and more," Jason said as he hugged Sandra after work. She felt sorry for her husband, seeing how tired he was. But what could she do? He was right. They had no one to help them. They had to do everything on their own. And it's not easy. Then came the long-awaited maternity leave. Sandra felt not very well and was glad to be able to at least a little rest before the appearance of her beloved daughter. The ultrasound had already shown that it would be a girl. The couple have even decided on a name. Jason said he wanted to name his daughter Emily. Sandra didn't mind. She liked the name too warm, so sweet. It was a late September evening. There was no sign of trouble. Jason had gone to his part-time job moving furniture from one town to another. He was glad to be able to bring an extra penny into the house, which of course was not really extra at all. The weather was good, the motorway was quiet. Jason was an experienced driver, despite his young age. Sandra was often anxious when her husband made long-distance journeys. But that evening she was not anxious at all. Sandra was lying on the couch with her laptop and picking out things for the baby girl to wear for her discharge. Yes, it's still a couple of months away. But while the parcel will be delivered, a lot of time will pass, she thought with a smile, looking at the tiny overalls and halters. Of course, the dresses were especially adorable. It turns out that even luxurious evening dresses are made for newborns. It was so nice to imagine my little girl in these clothes. I wonder who little Emily will look like. We won't know until 2 months from now. Jason and I are both cute. Emily's going to be a beauty either way. But that's not even the point, as long as she's healthy, Sandra thought. And then the phone rang. Sandra immediately felt something. She didn't feel like picking up the phone. A call in the evening, and from an unfamiliar number, not good. But there was no way out. Sandra Lucas' voice sounded excited. She recognized him immediately. It was Jason's partner, his colleague. It was Jason's partner, his colleague. Jason has crashed, the man's tone was worried. How? Sandra exhaled. She felt a sudden twinge in her stomach. He lost control on the motorway and went into a ditch. They took him to the regional hospital. Is he alive at least? I don't know anything. It was a terrible accident. I happened to be passing by, saw a familiar lorry, and then it happened right in front of me. Go to the regional hospital or call and find out. They took him there. I had time to ask the doctors. Sandra, having hastily changed her clothes, ran out of the house. The blood pounded in her temples, her legs shook, her heart clenched with an icy hand from anxiety. Just so long as I'm alive, just so long as I'm alive, she whispered without noticing it. Without thinking of safety, she stopped a hitchhiker. There was a guy behind the wheel. He looked anxiously at the pregnant young woman with terror-crazed eyes. Do you need help? He asked sympathetically. Is it time to go to the maternity hospital? No, to the regional hospital, Sandra asked. Will you bring me? Yes, of course. The young man did not ask unnecessary questions, and he did not take any money for the journey either. It was obvious that the guy sympathized and empathized with the passenger, but he didn't want to pry into her soul. However, he asked her a couple of times if she needed help. Sandra said no. How could this young man help her? The young man drove her to the gate of the regional hospital, wished her good luck and left, and Sandra rushed to the registrar's office to find out, finally, where her husband was and what happened to him. For a long time, she had to run between the buildings of a large regional hospital. No one knew anything. She was redirected from one department to another. Sandra was exhausted until she finally found the information she needed. Jason Brown, he's being operated on right now, the receptionist said, checking the notes in a thick notebook. He came in a few hours ago in a serious condition. Sandra exhaled with relief. Being in a serious condition. But he's alive. So the doctors got him to the hospital in time. It's in the hands of the surgeons now. What about him? What kind of injuries? She asked. And what are you, in fact, his wife? Yes, Sandra answered and mentally reproached herself for not having thought to bring her passport. But she had run out of the house in such a state that she had no time for that. Luckily, no documents were needed. The receptionist took her word for it. Wait for the operation to be completed. The surgeon will contact you afterwards. Just leave your phone number. Can I wait here? What's the point? The surgery could go on for hours. It's late. Go home. In your condition, you need to rest. There's nothing you can do for your husband here anyway. And yet Sandra stayed at the hospital until the end of the operation. She sat on the couch at the door of the surgical ward, praying to herself. She'd never done it before and didn't even think she knew how. Now the words themselves were popping up from somewhere in her subconscious. Leshka must survive. He just has to. How will she be without him, Sandra thought. The girl from the reception came up to her several times, brought her water, biscuits. At first she seemed so strict, so indifferent, but then she showed herself a sensitive and attentive person. She looked at Sandra with regret and said encouraging words. Even gave her a hug or two. This support made it a little easier. The operation took a long time. It ended in the morning. Sandra could not sleep a wink. How can you sleep when your heart is clenched with fear for the person you love? Finally, a tired surgeon came out into the corridor. Sandra, dying of fear, carefully looked at his face, trying to understand what news he was going to tell her. "The injuries are serious," said the surgeon. "We had to fight for the life of your husband. Pulled him, you might say, from the other side of the world. Now everything depends on the organism will cope or not. In any case, a few days will be critical. If he survives, he will have a long and difficult recovery." Sandra nodded her head. At that moment, she was not thinking about the difficulties ahead. The most important thing was that Jason survived. The surgeon was giving details of his injuries. His situation was very difficult indeed. What was he doing here? The doctor sighed sadly at the end of his monologue. He was so strong, handsome, strong. Now at best he will become an invalid, and that is if he survives. Oh, young people, you don't think with your heads. Sandra sighed. You can't explain to this man in a nutshell that Jason worked hard for their child, working multiple shifts, grabbing any part-time job he could get. He's got himself in a bind. Jason lost his guard on the motorway because he was tired. That's why he went into that ditch. Sandra stepped out onto the hospital porch after dawn. She hailed a taxi. At least she hadn't left her phone at home, although she could have in her condition. Then the phone vibrated again. Who would be calling this early? The man Jason worked for last night. "I know what happened," he said. "I understand your husband is in the hospital now?" "He's alive, I'm told. That's good. But you understand me too," said the man on the other end of the line. "My lorry is beyond repair. The furniture is broken too. According to the contract, your husband is fully financially responsible, so please reimburse me for this damage. Even if not at once, even in installments, but..." "Yes, of course," Sandra whispered into the receiver and pressed the reset button. Only now she thought of other problems, money. Jason was the main earner in their family. He paid the rent and bought groceries. Sandra's income was barely enough to make ends meet. Everything else was on Jason's strong and reliable shoulders. So what now? Disaster. Where's the money for food and rent? I'll probably need medication too. Jason will need to be treated, rehabilitated. Where are we going to get the money? The debt on the lorry, the furniture, it must be a fortune. What about them? They don't even have anything to sell. And Emily will be born soon enough. Tears spurted from Sandra's eyes. She sank helplessly to the steps of the hospital porch. And then, immediately a searing pain pierced her stomach, so much so that Sandra's eyes went black. Then it seemed to go away, but a moment later it happened again. Sandra wrapped her arms around her stomach and froze on the porch. The pain came in waves. Sandra could no longer think about Jason or the money problems that their family was facing. Nothing mattered as long as the infernal pain went away. Sandra called for help with all her might. People in white coats, a gurney, the bright light of the lamp in the operating theater. Sandra was asked some questions. She answered, sometimes clearly out of order. Then someone put a mask over her face and asked her to count from 10 to 1. Sandra concentrated and started counting. Soon there was blissful darkness and calmness came. Sandra felt she was floating in something soft and gentle. Most importantly, the excruciating pain was gone. No thoughts, no worries, no fears. Just peace and quiet. Sandra was even a little upset when she opened her eyes and found herself in a bright hospital room. Her mouth was terribly dry. Her tongue felt like it was glued to her palate. An unpleasant sensation. Sandra was lying under an IV. Some wires were attached to her chest. The girl felt a strange lightness in her whole body. She grabbed her stomach. There was no stomach. How is this possible? Sandra had a cold sweat on her forehead from fear and anxiety. "Hello, anyone?" Sandra shouted with all her might, but her voice sounded quiet, barely audible. The patient was noticed, though. A woman in a white coat, either a doctor or a nurse, entered the room at her call. "Where is my baby?" Sandra asked the question on the answer to which her whole life depended. She had never felt such fear before. "Your baby girl is in the room for premature babies. She's alive." A hospital employee rushed to reassure the patient. "You went into premature labor out of nervousness. It's good that you were in the hospital at the time. You got help quickly. Is she alive? Sandra checked again. Yes, she's alive. She's a good girl, strong, but she has to be raised in a hospital setting. She was premature. I've seen a lot of babies like that. This one's going to be fine. No, she's going to need rehab, of course, not without it. But the baby's not critical. Don't worry. Sandra nodded her head gratefully. The main thing was that Emily was alive. The young mother immediately believed the words of the woman in the white coat. Her daughter was really going to be all right. Ironically, the woman who later helped Sandra with the pram also had a baby that day. Also premature. But unlike Sandra, she had heard a very different prognosis from the doctors. Her baby was given no chance. Can I see my daughter? That's for later. You're too weak yourself right now. You've lost a lot of blood. And anyway, we all know what happened to your husband. Of course, you're nervous about having a premature birth. And my husband. Do you know if there's any news about him? I know he's alive in intensive care. That's all I know. An anxious days flowed, filled with fear for her daughter and husband. Injections, pills, painful procedures. Sandra felt her strength returning. That was a good thing, because she would need her strength. She will now have a disabled husband and a newborn daughter who requires intensive care due to prematurity. After all, money problems have not canceled. Can Sandra cope with all this alone? The nursing staff, knowing the story of the young mum, tried to support her in any way they could. They told her every day about Jason's condition. The man had already been moved out of intensive care. He even started to move his arms to speak and learned to sit up. But walking was much worse. All indications were that Jason would never get out of his wheelchair. Emily. Things were really good. She was growing, getting stronger, and most importantly, gaining weight. Sandra was taken to see her daughter on the third day after the baby girl was born. Emily lay in her cot, so small, so defenseless. Her tiny body was tangled with wires. And yet, compared to her peers, the girl looked the strongest. There were also babies who were born much earlier than they should have been. Emily was still 7 months in the womb. Sandra was soon released from the hospital, but the woman still came here every day to visit Emily and Jason and check on their condition with the doctors. Jason fought bravely. It hurt to see a young and once strong husband in a wheelchair. But he assured that he would get well soon and take up his work with renewed vigor. Because no more sickness and idleness, he looked at Emily's photos with a snowy smile. I can't wait to get back on my feet and see my daughter. I'll carry her around the park on my shoulders and learn to braid her hair. Sandra smiled sadly. From what the doctor had told her, Jason was unlikely to get up. There was a chance, but it would take a lot of money to rehabilitate him. Where was that going to come from? Thank the doctors so much, she thought. They'd help Jason get disability quickly, which meant Social Security benefits and at least some free medical care. But all of that was not enough for Jason's full recovery. And then the owner of the truck called every day demanding money. Sandra even had to go back to work. Now she cleaned the entrances in the mornings and evenings. It was money, no matter what. She had plenty of time for now. Emily was in the hospital. Another month or so passed, and then Jason was released from the hospital. He came home in a wheelchair. It's a good thing they had ramps in their driveway, but it was inconvenient enough. Yes, it was hard for Jason to get used to his new situation, but he was not discouraged and supported Sandra, and he looked for a job, surfing the internet in search of income for people who couldn't walk. There were very few jobs. And then, finally, Emily was discharged. The joy of the young parents was unrivaled, despite the seemingly hopeless situation. Jason quickly learned how to manipulate the baby to bathe, feed, and change nappies. Seeing that the young father was doing quite well, Sandra decided to go to work. We don't have enough money, and you can still cope with the baby at home. I'll go back to the canteen. There's no other way out. Jason had to agree. I could see for myself that it was very hard on him. He'd been the main breadwinner for so long, and now he was sitting on his wife's neck. But the young family really had no choice. They had to pay the rent, pay for food, pay off debt. The money that Jason had been saving for a couple of years for a future place to live had gone at a cosmic speed. Some of it went to medication, some of it to pay off the cost of the truck. It was a tough time. Sandra was at work 24 hours a day, working double shifts. Jason was doing the best he could at home. It wasn't easy for him either. Emily was growing up sickly, the effects of prematurity. She needed medicines, expensive vitamins, endless consultations and specialist examinations. Sandra was struggling. Jason, too, looked exhausted. He took part-time jobs, earning pennies, but he couldn't do nothing either. Emily was all over him. Only the head of the family, Jason, didn't think it was enough. And still the money was woefully inadequate. Even a pram for Emily was not enough to buy, and she needed it to take her to the clinic. One evening, Sandra was coming home from work. Her back was already aching and her legs were buzzing with fatigue. Heavy thoughts were swarming in her head. This was not how Sandra had imagined married life. In her dreams, she saw herself strolling through the park with a pram and a smart baby in it. Sandra often looked at such young mothers. They are walking calm, peaceful, happy, and do not even realize how lucky they are. They are lucky that they can walk freely with their babies and devote all their time to them. Emily doesn't even have a pram. Suddenly, Sandra's attention was caught by a woman walking towards her with a lovely coffee-colored pram. Comfortable, maneuverable, obviously very expensive and high quality. Sandra had seen them in children's shops. They cost a fortune. Sandra gave the woman a habitual glance. Something about the stranger caught her eye. So stylish, well-groomed. Old, of course. But nowadays many people have their first child, especially the rich. It's fashionable. But why is this woman so sad? Maybe something happened in her life. Something terrible must have happened to her. There's no other way to explain that look in her eyes. After all, she seems to be doing well. She's so beautiful. She's rolling an expensive pram in front of her. There's probably a baby in it, dressed in brand-name clothes. The woman rolled the pram up to a car park with rubbish bins. The rubbish hadn't been emptied for a long time. A sort of spontaneous dump had formed here. Sandra thought that maybe the woman would throw the bag of rubbish away and move on. But the stranger did otherwise. She sighed, rocked the pram a few times, and walked away. With a quick step, the woman walked behind the house somewhere far away, and the pram stayed where it was. Sandra, not believing her eyes, hurried to the rubbish bins. The first thing she did was look in the pram. There was no one there. Sandra exhaled. She had already decided that some crazy person had thrown the baby into a rubbish bin. Such cases are sometimes described on the internet. But the pram, fortunately, turned out to be empty. Why would a stranger leave it here? She probably threw it away. People sometimes leave good things near the rubbish for people in need to pick up. Like this woman, her baby must be all grown up by now. So she got rid of her now unwanted pram. Yes, that was the most reasonable explanation. But Sandra tried not to rejoice just yet. What if the woman comes back now? What if she just left the pram here while she went to run errands or fetch the baby? Strange choice of location, sure, but I don't know. Half an hour passed. The woman still hadn't turned up. Sandra had been watching the pram all this time, because what if someone else took it? A thing like that wouldn't stay near the rubbish bins. And they need the pram so much for Emily, it's a must. In the end, Sandra is sure that the owner does not need the pram and calmly rolls it to her house. Jason even whistled in amazement when he saw it. This is how Emily is transported. And what a luxury vehicle it is. I'm surprised myself, Sandra smiled. The woman left it on the rubbish bin right in front of me and walked away. I was still waiting a long time, in case she came back. But no, she didn't come back. It's strange. Such a beautiful pram, obviously expensive. I could have sold it. I'd make a lot of money. It's in perfect condition, like new, Sandra agreed. Strange, like new indeed, Jason shook his head, examining the tires carefully. Oh well, you can't understand them rich people. Jason volunteered to wash the pram himself, which was why he had discovered the very letter. A piece of paper folded in half was in the side pocket of the pram. It was a whole message. Come here, Jason called to his wife. She was playing with Emily at that moment. It's just I can't believe it. Read it. Jason held out the sheet to his wife. Where did you get this? It was lying in the pram. I don't even know how to respond to it. It's a terrific letter. Sandra took the piece of paper from her husband's hands and began to read. Beautiful, almost calligraphic handwriting, easy to read. It was clearly written by a very literate person. What's the point? Yeah, Jason's right. It's a pretty unbelievable story. Hello, people who found this letter, the message began. If you're reading this, it means the prom has finally met its little master or mistress. That's just wonderful. My name is Tiffany. I decided to leave the pram near the bins so that it could go to people in need, people with a baby who don't have any money for baby transport. May the prom last a long time and help you raise your child. Of course, you are people with low income, perhaps even living on the edge of poverty. There are all sorts of situations. Why am I so sure of that? Simply because it's unlikely that someone from a wealthy family would pick up a pram in a landfill. Such people prepare for the arrival of a child in advance, make lists, choose things in children's shops. I was just as happy a while ago. But you're happier than I am, because you have the main thing: your child, your son or daughter. It is happiness to be parents, to see your baby growing, to give him love, to introduce him to the world. I don't know what could be better than that. Probably nothing, so you're much happier than I am. You're going through a hard time right now, but I'm sure you'll get through it. You'll be fine in the end. Let this wheelchair be a help to you on your start to success. It's like she's describing, as Sandra said in amazement as she looked at Jason. Exactly, agreed her husband. That's what's so amazing about it. But go ahead and read on. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, especially at the end. Sandra delved into the reading again. My life has been a fairy tale in which all my wishes have come true. Since I was a child, I have never been denied anything. My father is a successful businessman, my mother a successful financier. I was the only granddaughter of my mom and dad's grandparents. You can imagine how they spoiled me. How much love, care, and attention I received. They invested a lot in me, and I knew that the moment would come and I would pass it all on to my children. Since I was little, I dreamed of a big family, and in games with my girlfriends, I always took on the role of a mother with many children. Since childhood, I heard from everyone that I will be a great mother when the time comes. So I grew up with that thought. And then I grew up. It turned out that life is very bright, diverse, interesting. We traveled a lot with my parents, with friends. It's something completely different. In general, I had a happy student life. I had time to live abroad and visit different parts of the world. I had adventures. As they say, it will be something to remember in my old age. It was a very cheerful period of my life, bright, full of events. And then I got interested in playing on the stock exchange. Somehow it happened that I became a successful broker, though I never aspired to it. I thought I would get married and have children, as I dreamed. Someday I would start a family. But I didn't. Work took me over completely. The excitement, the success, the recognition of reputable financiers. I was invited to conduct seminars in major business centers. Business sharks listened to my words. It all made my head spin. I didn't notice how my priorities changed. Of course, sometimes I thought that it was time to get married and become a mom. Time is running out. But on the one hand, I was still young. On the other hand, there was no one I saw as my spouse. Maybe those were just excuses, because I was happy with the life I was leading. Because when I looked at my friends who were mired in childish affairs and problems, I rejoiced in my freedom. The once cheerful and energetic girls had turned into haggard women. They only talked about children and their skills. It made me sad. I felt like a queen. Successful, respected, indispensable. Famous economists sought my advice, magazines wrote about me. It's a feeling I can't describe. This glitter and tinsel overshadowed for me my main desire. I always wanted to have children. I wanted to take care of babies, to teach them something, to love them. But at that time, for some reason, I decided that motherhood is the fate of lazy, limited housewives. I even condemned women who were completely immersed in children, considered them too down to earth, not capable of anything but childbearing. I almost stopped talking to my family friends. Their children annoyed me. I don't know how it happened. What are you, a child free? Lingered a question that one of my acquaintances once asked me. She had recently given birth to a son and could think of nothing but her child. I wondered. No, not a child-free person. It's just that at that time I didn't want to burden myself with all this. I mean, it's nice not to have to depend on anyone, to be free and easy. I wanted to go to the seaside with friends. I wanted to go clubbing or shopping. I wanted to start a new romance and plunge headlong into a beautiful relationship. It seemed to me that I would still have time to become a mother sometime in the future, after many years. For now, my life was bright and exciting as it was. And then somehow I got bored with it all. Work, risk, superficial novels, clubs, drinking, dancing, even traveling. I wanted a family warmth, a reliable person next to me. I guess the time had come. True, I was already 35 at the time. I remembered my old dream of becoming a mother of many children. Now I looked at my married friends not with contempt and regret, but almost with envy. I too wanted it all. Husband, children, family. Then came the realization that work and recognition will not replace the warmth of loved ones. Even tears came to my eyes at these thoughts. I grew up, I guess. And that's when I met Scott. A chance meeting at a coffee shop where we both had breakfast before work. We had what they call a spark. We looked at each other at first. Then he came over. Young lady, Scott said, "I can't take my eyes off you. You're incredibly beautiful, and your eyes are so amazing. I can see in them that you are a very kind, caring person." It was nice to receive such an exquisite compliment, especially from a man you liked at first sight. But I hastened to disappoint him. "You are not a very good judge of character," I said. "You don't know me at all, and you thought I was kind and good. I'm not." "You don't seem to know yourself very well," Scott smiled. "I'm a good judge of character, and I'm never wrong. You'll find that out." Then we got to talking. I was immediately interested in Scott. He was so smart, so perceptive, and most importantly, he looked at me with admiration and tenderness. That's how our relationship began. 6 months later, we were already celebrating a lavish wedding. He turned out to be the owner of a small dairy. What won me over most of all was his sense of humor. And a caring mother, of course. He finally made me feel like a woman in the full sense of the word. It turns out that it is very pleasant when you are looked after, when you are protected. Of course, we did not put off the question of heirs, as both of us were already at the age when it was time to become parents. Turns out he dreams of a large family, just as I once did around Scott. That childhood dream of mine came alive again. I realized that more than anything I wanted to be a mom, and as soon as possible. And that's when I found out it wasn't that simple. I couldn't get pregnant. For the first time in my life, I couldn't get what I wanted. It was discouraging. Scott told me not to worry. He told me about people he knew who hadn't become parents right away. But it didn't make me feel any better. I snapped at my husband, even though I loved him very much. He patiently endured all my tantrums. I still don't understand where he got so much strength. After a while, we went to the doctors. At first, they couldn't make a diagnosis for a long time. Scott and I were given a full examination. There were no problems with money, so we visited the most famous doctors both in our country and abroad. After a while, the doctors found the cause of the problem. It turned out that there was a subtle genetic breakdown in my health, which was almost impossible to detect. But also how to correct the situation, the doctors had no idea. If I had decided on motherhood earlier, everything would have worked out. But the years in my case played against me. I was immediately warned that the chances were practically nil, and then I enthusiastically joined the fight. I was not used to giving up and losing in anything. I took the doctor's words as a challenge. And again, treatment, examinations, endless analyses and procedures. I stopped working. I no longer enjoyed anything at all. I had a goal, and I was on my way to it. How can that be? My dream, and suddenly it doesn't come true. I just couldn't get my head around that. There was a period when I began to hate women with small children and pregnant women, just because I was so jealous of them. Why did they get it and I didn't? It's so unfair. Why are they better than me? I'd have been a much better mother. Cattle was so patient with me. He comforted me, supported me. My husband said many times that all he wanted was for me to come back the same old me, cheerful, kind, cheerful. I miss my Tiffany incredibly. It's been so long since I've been in touch with this intelligent, sensitive woman. Go find that woman, I replied resentfully. If your wife doesn't suit you anymore, why are you doing this? Scott sighed and hugged me. I just miss our old life. I'd love to help him, but I'm so fixated on what's unattainable for me. I've lost my mind. Let's adopt a baby, Scott urged. There are so many kids in orphanages who need parents. They've been betrayed from birth, abandoned and forsaken. We have a lot of opportunities. We'll give that child or those children everything they need to be happy. Think about it. Just think about it. He even showed me pictures of orphans from orphanages. Big-eyed babies, touching, defenseless, so in need of loving and caring adults by their side. But I didn't want to hear anything. I needed my own blood child. What do I need other people's children for? Their parents don't even want them. So what do we need them for? Imagine whose offspring end up in an orphanage. Lazy, alcoholics, don't be daft. We'll work it out in the end. But nothing worked out. Doctors were throwing up their hands and saying more and more often that genetic diagnoses were very difficult to work with. Treatment became more and more expensive and more difficult. The outlook was increasingly dim. I spent 5 years trying to have a baby. It was a very difficult time. There was hope and disappointment all over the place. I lived in anxiety, then in the pain of another failure. The cattle. How did he have so much patience? He was always there to support me, even though I was acting crazy. From time to time, my husband talked about having a foster baby, but I didn't want to hear anything. It was as if his persuasion spurred me on. Now, I also wanted to prove him wrong. We're having our own baby. Because I said so. He's offering me some nonsense. I've tried everything. I've tried innovative methods. I've tried folk medicine. I even went to a healer. The shaman was running around me, shouting strange words. I smoked all over the room. I smoked everything. But even then, I thought I was doing the right thing. Knocking on every door, taking every chance. Temporary blackout, no other way to put it. Scott looked at me with regret and concern. He was afraid for my condition, because I didn't look like myself at all. And then, finally, a miracle. One May morning, I learned that I was expecting a child. I was overjoyed. I even fainted from the abundance of emotions. I looked at the positive test and my legs were shaking. Finally. How I wanted at that moment to speed up time, to make this happy event come sooner. My long-awaited baby boy was born. There were still months ahead, but I already felt like his mother. The doctors were surprised at the time. According to them, there was no hope. But my case turned out to be a miracle. I naively believed that everything worked out because my desire was so strong and it changed the world and the order of things in it. And then I found myself almost omnipotent. The cattle, of course, were very happy too. I felt a kind of superiority over him. How he'd been going on and on about foster children. He had tried to reconcile me to our situation, and in the end, he was wrong. I was happy about that too. It's embarrassing to write that now. Readers, forgive me for describing everything in such detail here now. It is necessary, perhaps, to speak out. I want someone to know about my fate, to understand my feelings. Yes, read all the way to the end. Look, there's something very interesting and important waiting for you. I really want to help you and your baby, not only financially, but also with advice. My life. Make the right conclusions and do not repeat my mistakes. Appreciate what you have. Pregnancy was difficult from the very beginning. Constant threats of miscarriage. I didn't leave the hospital for months, sometimes weeks. I was lying in bed, not getting out of bed at all, taking care of my baby. My health was deteriorating sharply. Doctors offered me to get rid of the pregnancy, because the analyses said that the body could not cope with the load. My life was in danger. After all, I had a serious diagnosis that I could not give birth to. I didn't want to listen to anything. I had to dream of pregnancy for so long, waiting for this moment for so long, and suddenly giving up on a lined-up baby. No way. You are doctors and you are paid a lot of money to do your job, I shouted at the nursing staff. Then do it properly. It's only a few months away. It's the 21st century. Is medicine so powerless these days? My doctors used to say. Yes, you're right, doctors are gods. Are you suffering? The child suffers. The consequences could be catastrophic. There are no guarantees. You have to understand that. But I didn't want to hear any of it. By then I already knew I was carrying my son. I'd even dreamt about him many times. For the sake of this baby, I was ready to endure any pain and to lie in hospital, even for the whole 9 months. I needed a child, and that was it. The fact that the baby suffered in the womb, not adapted for carrying children, I did not even think about it. That's how selfish I was back then. Cattle, seeing that I could not change my mind, was there for me and just supported me. He didn't argue anymore, so as not to make me nervous. He agreed with everything, held my hand, reassured me, bought all the necessary drugs, talked to the doctors. Just a hug when I needed it. I was getting worse. I hoped that the baby was suffering less, but according to the ultrasound, it was also very, very bad. I was so scared for my baby boy. He was the meaning of my life. I was talking to my son, asking him to hang in there to distract myself somehow. I was surfing baby stuff websites, looking at prams, choosing clothes for my boy. It was such a pleasant hassle. We had parcels coming home to us, lots and lots of them. Looking at these things, I thought about good things because, well, here they are, the proof that Scott and I are almost parents. There's so much baby stuff in the house, we just have to wait for their little owner. He's going to be the happiest baby in the world. And the difficulties will be forgotten like a bad dream. The boy was born much prematurely. The doctor's manipulations didn't help. The organism decided to get rid of what was destroying my health and harming me. The baby turned out to be weak, sickly. I saw his thin arms and legs, some strange, bright skin color. My heart sank with pity and tenderness. Only looking at my son wrapped in wires, I realized that I was a complete egoist. The doctors had warned me this would happen. And now I'm much better. My health is recovering rapidly. The child is bad. He is all alone in the intensive care unit, fighting for his life. The doctors said right away that there was little hope. Congenital abnormalities, general weakness of the baby due to the fact that my pregnancy was hard. But I still believed in a miracle. I even threatened the doctors that if anything, they would retaliate. Of course, that didn't help. My son struggled for a few days, then gave up after all. When they told me that, my world turned upside down. I was so angry at everyone, blaming the doctors, even Scott. He, in my opinion, didn't have enough faith in the happy outcome, and therefore was to blame too. It got to the point where Scott put me in a clinic. Padded room, helpful staff. Talking to a therapist. Silence, rest, medication. I began to slowly come round, rethink things and realize things. I realized what had happened. Selfish people are fixated on what they want. I realized how badly I'd behaved towards Scott. I thought about the future. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I realized that I needed to channel my energy not into anger and hatred, but into creation. That's when the conversation with my husband came back to my mind. Scott was right. There are so many underprivileged children in the world. You have to help them. You have to support them. Just because you don't have a baby of your own doesn't mean you have no one to give your unsold love and care to. I returned home a different person. The cattle were the most excited about it. He said he missed the old Tiffany so much, and now she's back with him. It was really nice. Things that reminded me of the tragedy that had happened to us, which I had bought in myriad ways: clothes, toys, furniture. Cattle put them in a separate room, a kind of warehouse or museum. These things, looking at them, still pained me deeply. Let's throw it away, I said to my husband. Why? Wouldn't it be better to give them away to the needy, he wondered. The cattle, as always, were right. I started traveling to shelters with boxes and bags. There I got acquainted with the staff, learnt the stories of the children. Lots and lots of stories, complicated fates, tragedies, betrayals. Someday, when I have more time, I will write a book about it. People need to know this. It fascinated me. I wanted to help underprivileged kids, to make their lives a little better. And I could. I had all the opportunities, and now I think to organize my own charitable foundation. It's a lot of work, but I can do it. I've already started to learn a little bit about how to set it up. In the meantime, I help kids from orphanages, buying things they need and organizing holidays. I am so happy to see smiles on the faces of these boys and girls. Some time passed, it seemed to me that I gave away all the things that I bought for my son, but one day I came across this pram. I remembered how carefully I chose it, studied the features, looked at the appearance. I wanted my son to be comfortable in it. But unfortunately, he never had time to try it out. The pram was stored in the basement. That's why Scott and I had forgotten about it. He tensed up when I noticed the thing, thinking I was going to get hurt again. But strangely enough, all I felt was a slight sadness. Regret, because I already had meaning in my life again. And I knew that my baby, what had happened to him, it wasn't all for nothing. Now, in honor of my son, I will help many other children. Our boy didn't live long, but his short life will make a huge difference in this world. But what about the pram? I had a very interesting idea about it. Orphanages where children have a hard life. Everyone knows about it. They often talk about it, but at least they are provided for, always fed and clothed. They lack parental love and care. At the same time, they are fully provided for financially. But there is another category of children. Their parents earn pennies and cannot buy them even the most necessary things. How many such families do we have? Usually nobody helps them. There are mom and dad, let them raise their heirs. That's what most people think. But there are different situations. Not only lazy and irresponsible people get into difficult situations. I decided to leave this pram where it will be found by people who need it badly. Usually good things that are no longer needed are left near the rubbish. That's what I did with the pram. Thank you for reading this story to the end. I hope my letter eventually found the right recipient. I believe it did. You must be desperate right now. You don't have enough money to live on. You don't see a future. So I want to help you with something else. Not far from the rubbish bins where you found the pram, there's an unfinished shop building, an abandoned property. I left something else under the porch there for you. I hope it will help you get your life together and raise your baby to be a decent human being. Good luck with everything. Tiffany. Sandra set the sheet aside in confusion and looked at Jason. Do you think this is all true? She asked Jason. You mean about something waiting for us under the porch of the unfinished building? And about that, too. And about the whole thing in general, she clarified. I don't know what to think, Jason shrugged. But I'm definitely going to look under the porch right now. I don't feel like waiting until morning. The young parents put Emily to bed. They waited until she was snoring sweetly in her cot before they went outside. They were not worried about their daughter. They knew that she now sleeps at least 4 hours in a row, and they do not need so much time. The unfinished building was very close. They could do it in 20 minutes. This is the place, Jason said as he wheeled his buggy up to the porch of the unfinished shop. He bent down and started fumbling under the porch with his hands. Sandra was standing nearby, afraid of something. She looked around, wondering if this was some kind of prank or worse. What if they were being set up? What if right now there was someone watching them from around the corner? Look, Jason exclaimed, pulling out a small roll frozen in cellophane. The boy immediately tore open the wrapping and whistled in surprise. Sandra looked at what he was holding out to her. It was a thick wad of note slots and lots of money. Sandra even pinched her hand to make sure it wasn't a dream. There was a fortune in here. Maybe not, the girl doubted. Yeah, no, it looks like the real thing, Jason said, examining the notes closely. So everything in this letter is true from the first to the last word. Unbelievable. Sandra still couldn't believe it, couldn't believe that strangers had saved their family from imminent disaster. But that's how it turned out in the end. The money was enough to rehabilitate Jason. The young man was quickly put back on his feet in a paid medical center. Now he could work again. It's true what they say, if you want to make a man happy, first take something away from him, and then give it back, Jason rejoiced. He was walking at last. It took a long time to learn how to do it. It didn't all work at once. Daddy and daughter took their first steps together. One from the moment of birth, the other after the accident. The young people also had enough to buy their own flat. A small 2-bedroom in an unprestigious area of the city, but it was their own cozy native beloved. With what pleasure the young made repairs in their nest and arranged it. Yes, the money found under the porch was enough for the new place. Jason was working again, so the family was no longer in poverty. Sandra was able to finish her maternity leave in peace. Now she didn't have to work from dawn to dusk in the canteen. What a blessing it was to watch your child grow up, to introduce him to the world, to devote time to him without thinking about how to survive. Jason paid off his debt to his former employer and found a new job. Now he wasn't working multiple shifts and was much more careful and cautious than before. Life was getting better. One day Sandra was walking in the park with her pram, the same lovely coffee-colored pram. It was designed to be converted into a seated vehicle. In the pram, Emily, wearing a light white dress and a smart hat, wiggled her legs and looked at the world in wonder. She looked like a doll. And Sandra suddenly caught herself thinking that she was now that happy young mother, one of those she had once envied so much. And it was all thanks to Tiffany. A woman who had survived a tragedy, but had managed to overcome herself and find her true calling. Tiffany is probably now helping other orphans and poor children. It's wonderful that there are people like that in the world. As the years passed, Jason and Sandra worked, raising Emily. They weren't poor anymore, just an ordinary, middle-class family. Even managed to get away to the seaside once in a while, all thanks to the occasional help from complete strangers. Sandra tried to look for Tiffany, scouring the internet, looking at many pages on social networks. Why? But just wanted to say to the person who had done so much for their family's future, thank you, just a simple thank you. Let Tiffany know that her pram and money really did save an entire family. It would probably make her feel good. But Sandra soon realized that Tiffany apparently lived in a different town altogether, because no one supervised the local shelters. And there was no children's aid fund in their town either. Some kind of fairy, Jason said. He, too, wanted to find their savior. She'd come out of nowhere at a difficult moment, and then vanished without a trace. It's mystical, our guardian angel, that's what it is. Years passed. Emily grew up to be a pretty girl. She always got excellent grades. Her parents were proud of their daughter and very much hoped that she, unlike them, will definitely be able to get a good education. They both encouraged Emily to go to university. The girl herself was not against it. Since the third grade, she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Of course, Emily knew the story of the pram. Her parents told their daughter about it when she was about 5 years old. Every day, Sandra remembered the woman who had left the expensive new pram near the rubbish bin. Her face was clearly etched in Sandra's memory. It was Tiffany, about whom she had just read the article. This was the amazing fairy who had helped their family out of poverty. Doubts, of course, still remained. So Sandra started looking for information about the accidental savior. She wanted to know for sure. There were plenty of articles on the internet about this woman. Her foundation had done a great job. 1,000 children had received great support over the years. Tiffany didn't just help children. She attracted the powerful to the cause. Famous actors, businessmen, they all participated. Tiffany repeatedly emphasized in interviews that she could never have done it alone. The world is not without kind people, she told a journalist with a smile. There are far more kind people than indifferent and callous ones. I know that for a fact now. Tiffany looked happy, full of vigor, content with life. Her shining eyes had nothing in common with the wan look of the woman Sandra remembered. It was understandable back then Tiffany, if that was her, was going through a tragedy. Now the woman had found herself and was dealing with an important and very responsible matter. Should I write her or not? Sandra said aloud. Too bad Jason is away on a business trip. I'd like to consult with him now. Sandra was used to discussing all important matters with her husband. The woman decided to find out a little more about Tiffany to see if it was worth bothering such a busy man. Tiffany had a busy and colorful life. She traveled extensively both across the country and around the world. Almost always with her were her foster children, now teenagers. So different from each other. What would their fate have been if they had stayed in the orphanage? And then Sandra came across an article that shattered all her doubts, because this interview was about her too, about Sandra. It was a long article with lots of pictures. Tiffany answered the questions thoroughly without skimming over the details. Where did it all start? A reporter asked. How did you decide that your calling was to help underprivileged children? As I said earlier, it all started after Scott and I lost our son, a long-awaited, long-suffering child, Tiffany replied. We had been preparing for his arrival. We had so much stuff left over. I thought that these toys, nappies, cradles could be of use to someone. Our son is gone, but we can't let all this stuff go to waste. We delivered bags and boxes to shelters. It is so logical to give unwanted children's things to orphanages. They will always be useful there. Then, when I thought that I had already got rid of all the things, I saw the very pram that I had so carefully chosen for my child. It was painful, I'll admit it. But by that time, I had learned to cope with my emotions and decided that I had to help some needy family, people who had a baby, but no money for new things for the baby. I had to find a special family. Any family would not suit me. For this purpose, I even traveled to neighboring towns, looking around. I thought I was abnormal myself, but still I continued this strange occupation. Perhaps the tragedy then confused my mind. Anyway, I have no regrets. Then one day I saw a sad girl. There was so much anxiety in her eyes. Visually, it was noticeable how the fragile shoulders of the girl were pressed with a heavy weight of problems. She was walking through the park next to a guy who was traveling in a wheelchair. It was probably her husband. The girl was holding a tiny infant in her arms, cradling the baby in her arms, and it was so beautiful. But she didn't seem to realize it. There was despair in her eyes. The young man in the wheelchair was cheerful, even smiling. But I could see he was on the edge too. I followed this family. I was very attracted to them. I walked a little behind them and listened to their conversation. The guy needed expensive treatment. As I understood, something had happened to him not so long ago, and he had moved into a wheelchair and lost his income. The girl worked tirelessly at a hard job. The child, as much as he could, was taken care of by her husband himself, a profound invalid. But most importantly, they talked about the wheelchair. Tiffany continued. About the wheelchair, the reporter interjected. Yes, about the wheelchair. That became a kind of sign for me. They dreamed of a pram for their baby. That way it would be easier for the man to take the infant to the clinic. And then something clicked in my head. I realized that this was the family I had to help. But a pram that was too little. These good kids couldn't climb out of poverty on their own. They needed help at the start, and I could give it to them. Not only could, but I wanted to, because, well, how could I not? I'm sure they did the right thing with the money. Money? The journalist didn't understand. Yes, I decided to give them not only the pram, but also an amount that should have been enough for the guy's treatment, and at least a small flat. But how to do it without arousing suspicion? I thought about it for a long time. And then the plan just sort of fell into place. Tiffany pulled herself away from the screen and smiled. Wow. She was now recognizing her story from the other side. It was so interesting, so fascinating and unusual. The woman pulled the very same letter out of the photo album. Of course, Sandra and Jason had kept the message. Tiffany had written it years ago. She so sincerely wanted to help a family in distress. I wrote the future owners of the pram a whole message on a sheet of paper on both sides. In it, I told them about my life, about the history of the pram. It was like psychotherapy for me. It was as if I was getting rid of, spilling out my pain and healing. At the end of the letter, I told this young couple where to look for money. I hoped that everything worked out well for them. I really wanted to know the fate of this family, and even went to that town on purpose, but I never met any of them in the park. Maybe they'd gone somewhere else. Or did we just miss each other? We're really doing fine, Sandra whispered directly into the monitor. Thanks to you, we're really doing fine. But why didn't you just give them the money? The journalist didn't understand. I can't remember now. I was in such a strange state at the time. Perhaps I didn't want these people to get tense or scared. After all, my story is not simple, and the situation itself could seem suspicious. In any case, I wanted to remain a mysterious stranger for this family, a kind fairy. But it's almost a legendary story. I'm sure it will be passed down in that family from generation to generation, almost like a fairy tale. A fairy tale, Sandra smiled. It is. Emily thought for a long time that they were actually helped by a fairy. It turns out the meeting wasn't a coincidence. Tiffany knew in advance that the pram and the money would go to them, and yet there were plenty of happy coincidences in this story. After all, Tiffany had come to their town looking for the right family. It was to their town that she had met them in the park, following them around. Surely they must have attracted attention then. A strange trio, a young, confused woman, a tiny infant, and a guy in a wheelchair. Tiffany spotted them, followed them. She heard bits and pieces of conversation between the couple and was strengthened in her decision to help them. Sandra didn't think any further. She was already writing a message to Tiffany. It was long, almost like that memorable letter from the pram. Sandra told the woman her story of poverty in detail. She mentioned the despair of the car accident, the disability of the sole breadwinner, the birth of her premature daughter, the huge debts. Tiffany needs to know that her help really did save an entire family. At the end, Sandra wrote about her life today and even attached photos of her family, including one from a seaside holiday. "There are no words to express our gratitude," was how Sandra ended her letter. The woman reread the message again and pressed the send button. The rich man looked out of the window and saw the little boy take a crust of bread out of the bin. And after barely following him, T4. Nicholas parked outside a shopping center and looked out the window. It was an early August evening. The day was already slipping towards dusk, but it gets dark late in the summer. It was still a long way from the cool, fresh twilight. Nicholas had had a difficult day at work checking the month's results, developing a new project. But the man even liked this multitasking. Firstly, the solution of constantly arising issues seemed to be a fascinating game. Secondly, at the end of the month will be a good raise to the already high salary. Thirdly, work issues distracted from sad thoughts, did not let me dive into the past. Fatigue, workload that was an escape from heavy feelings. Nicholas did not hurry to get out of the car. It was cool in the cabin, and there, outside scorching. It had been an abnormal heat wave for several weeks now. People were looking forward to autumn, to breathe freely. Nicholas looked out the window again. Two people came into his field of vision, a middle-aged man and a skinny teenage boy, tall, a little angular. He was walking and talking animatedly with his father, gesticulating vigorously, smiling from time to time. Light, springy gait, tanned long arms, legs, feet, brightly colored sneakers. When Nicholas saw boys like that, he always wondered if he might have a son just like him right now. He would have turned 14 this summer, would have received a passport. Perhaps his son would be into programming or sports football, basketball. Or maybe he liked to draw. But what's the use of thinking about it if this boy was never born? Or maybe it wasn't supposed to be a boy at all, a girl. But a sixth sense told Nicholas that many years ago he had lost a son through his own fault. To think otherwise was to try to justify and deceive himself. How many times over the years had Nicholas regretted his behavior? But there was no turning back the clock. All he had to do was suffer with guilt, long for an unfulfilled future, miss Bridget, and vainly try to look for her traits in others. To look, and of course not to find her. Nicholas had been different, then young, selfish, even windy. Before he met Bridget, he'd never wanted to remember his old self. It was embarrassing. How could he have behaved like that? Nicholas realized that thoughts and memories were taking over him again. It happened sometimes, some situations from the past, voices, images, all of it still wouldn't let him go. And the man assumed it wouldn't let go. Well, he deserved a life like this. Nicholas was born and raised in a fairly well-to-do family for his city. Father a successful businessman, mother chief accountant of a large factory. Big beautiful house, expensive toys, fashionable clothes, traveling. Nicholas did not know anything to refuse. In addition to parents, he was actively spoiled grandparents on both sides. The boy early realized that between them there is a kind of competition who the grandson loves more. And the cunning kid began to take advantage of this, played on the feelings of elderly relatives, manipulated them, and achieved everything he wanted. Nicholas studied at a prestigious public school. There he always had a lot of friends, boys and girls. They formed a strong and very cheerful company. All these were children from wealthy families, so teenagers did not deny themselves anything: cafes, amusement rides, entertainment centers. Later, expensive clubs, partying and bars. Nicholas's life was fun and carefree. He entered the local university, did not want to go to New York, as his father did not persuade him. Harvard, it's a completely different level. Other prospects, the parent insinuated the grown-up offspring. But this same offspring understood perfectly well that there he would not have the same freedom as here. At Harvard, he would have to work hard on his books, otherwise he would not get a diploma. And here he has everything already in place. On a tip from his older friends, Nicholas knew who and how much to pay before the session, so as not to waste his youth on lectures and seminars. And the kid was not going to deviate from his plans. As always, everything turned out exactly as he wanted. Nicholas became a student of the economics department of the local university, and a golden era of life came for him. From his parents, the guy moved out. Grandmother and grandfather on his father's side gave the only grandson in honor of graduation a flat in the city center. And his maternal grandparents, in an effort to keep up with their relatives, presented him with the keys to an expensive foreign car. Nicholas felt happy, all-powerful, independent. Ahead was a bright, happy life, friends, entertainment, beautiful girls. In this busy schedule, there was no room for studying. Nicholas almost did not appear at the university, so visited before the session to solve issues with teachers. It was a common thing in their university. Girls, Nicholas was now ashamed of his attitude to them. Then, in his student years, the guy considered them, probably, beautiful things, created especially for him and people like him. Nicholas did not consider the feelings of girls, did not listen to their desires, and chose his companions, like goods in a shop, purely on the basis of appearance. In his youth, he liked girls with modeling data, necessarily big eyes and relaxed, smiling. On the others, he simply did not look. The handsome, wealthy guy had no shortage of girlfriends. Girls themselves stick to him, came to get acquainted in a club or cafe, even waited at the door of the university and attracted the attention of some request. Naturally, under such circumstances, Nicholas felt himself a valuable prize. It seemed to him that everything was possible. Sometimes Nicholas got bored with easy relationships. He always liked difficult tasks, and he himself paid attention to some girl, himself tried to get her. It was sort of like a game of hunter and prey. Some girls for a while built themselves unattainable beauties, but Nicholas realized that the game had begun and used all his charm to break the resistance. He liked to feel himself as a miner, to create something like a beautiful fairy tale, a huge bouquet of roses, cute plush toys, exquisite jewelry. And also daring, reckless acts like a love song with a rock band under the windows of another beauty. Nicholas liked to invent something new, to surprise, to cause delight and admiration. And now the coldest beauty melts in his arms. When the game ended, Nicholas's interest quickly faded. Seemingly recently so mysterious, attractive girl suddenly became boring and uninteresting. Nicholas withdrew. He became dull, dreary. He did not tolerate grayness in his everyday life. To break up with another girl had to behave ugly. It was no longer as exciting and pleasant as the beginning of the relationship. But what can you do? Nicholas did not like women's tears. He was weighed down by long conversations and pleading. It was depressing and made him feel like a bad person. That's why Nicholas preferred the tactic of accusation. He always found something to accuse the passaic, unwilling to accept the separation. Everyone had their weaknesses. Yeah, maybe it was too harsh. It is possible that the girls after such antics appeared complexes, even psychological trauma. Well, how could they not? Otherwise they just kept up. Different situations happened in Nicholas's life. One of his former lovers, Cassandra, distinguished himself, especially after this story. Nicholas became much more careful with her. Nicholas met Cassandra at a nightclub. She was his type of girl, bright, beautiful, liberated. She danced so selflessly on the dance floor that it was impossible not to notice her. The girl was clearly already drunk. Her long hair fluttered beautifully as Cassandra turned in the dance. The girl was the center of attention and was clearly enjoying herself. Nicholas had just recently broken up with Ellie. They had been dating for almost 3 months, a record for a young man. And now the guy was in search of new adventures. Of course, he immediately decided that this evening he would leave the club only with her, with a beautiful girl in a daring miniskirt and sandals on a high platform. Cassandra looked even a little vulgar. Nicholas immediately realized that he would not be bored with this girl. Nicholas didn't approach her right away. He had to take a closer look first. He admired Cassandra for about an hour before he decided to get closer. The girl came to the club with her friends. They had long ago returned to their table, and Cassandra had not left the dance floor. She enjoyed the whole atmosphere of the club, the loud music, her own movements. It was very appealing to Nicholas. He just smiled at her. Catching her gaze, she froze for a moment. Her huge blue eyes appraised Nicholas from head to toe, and then their gazes met again. Nicholas admired the girl's face, which immediately caught his attention. She was even more beautiful up close than she looked from afar. Chiseled cheekbones, sharply defined lips, huge, simply bottomless eyes. The girl suddenly, without saying a word, came close to Nicholas. The guy, as enchanted, watched her graceful movements and waited for what would happen next. Beauty clearly took the initiative, and it was very interesting and unusual, not according to the script. Cassandra looked intently into Nicholas' eyes and kissed him. He, not believing what was happening, put his arms around the girl and pressed her against him. She did not object. Then they danced together. Nicholas realized that he was fascinated by this strange girl. He liked the light in her eyes, a kind of glimmer of light madness. He had never had a girl like her before. She was very different from the others. Then they met and learnt each other's names. Cassandra took him by the hand to the balcony. It was quiet and deserted. "I've never met anyone like you before," Nicholas told her admiringly. "That's not surprising. There just aren't any others like me," Cassandra smiled. Cassandra rented a room in the city. She had once come here from the countryside and had even managed to get into law school. But she'd never been much of a student, though she was certainly not lacking in ability. She just liked entertainment, socializing, dancing till morning in nightclubs, adventures. All this was not very well combined with the role of a diligent student. In her first year, the beautiful Cassandra fell in love with a young and charismatic history teacher, so much so that she couldn't think of anything but his gray eyes. The girl has always been characterized by a straightforward character. She was used to taking what she liked, and of course Cassandra did not hide her feelings from this young professor. He couldn't resist the young beauty's charms. The dean's office found out about it. The professor was forced to resign. Cassandra herself was expelled at the first opportunity. I must say it was not difficult, because the girl rarely attended lectures. In student life, she was attracted by a completely different side. The girl did not want to return to the village. It was boring and stuffy there. Since she was a little girl, she dreamed of breaking out of this swamp. But in the dormitory, which was provided only to students, after expulsion could not stay. So she had to get a job as a waitress in a bar. I had to get money for food and accommodation somewhere. The girl was hired unofficially. They needed beautiful waitresses to cheer up the customers. The pay was good. It was enough to rent a small flat, food, and even inexpensive but spectacular clothes from local economy-class boutiques. Cassandra was completely satisfied with this life. No dusty work, pleasant surroundings. It was a large bar. Every night there were a lot of guests, and local musicians, mostly rock bands and rock soloists, played on the stage. Cassandra liked the music. In general, she felt in her element here. Of course, the guests, staff, and musicians paid attention to the young beauty. In this bar, the girl met Michael, her first true love. He was the lead singer of the band that enjoyed the greatest success here. Soon they were living together. Michael showed Cassandra the world. They traveled to many American cities. Michael's band toured the country, playing gigs here in their hangouts, train stations, bars, and even concert halls. Then, as is often the case, Michael met another muse. Cassandra long experienced the parting, but then decided that it is not worth wasting her youth on longing and regret, especially since she again has an admirer. Cassandra consciously decided not to fall in love again. It hadn't done her any good twice. Now she was just living, enjoying companionship, youth, freedom, getting only pleasures from life and not thinking about the future. She was a little reckless, and that attracted Nicholas to her. He himself lacked her lightness and courage. Cassandra could drive after a bottle of champagne and speed past a police post. She fearlessly sat on the roofs of high-rise buildings with her long legs hanging down, easy to get along with people. She even shoplifted not out of necessity, but out of excitement. There was a lot more. I can't list them all. Nicholas was never bored with her. He didn't know what to expect from the girl in the next moment, and it made his head spin. Cassandra wrote poetry and played the guitar masterfully. She also made witty jokes and sang beautifully. She invariably attracted people to her, a person celebrity next to whom one is never bored. And this amazing girl was head over heels in love with Nicholas, even though she had once vowed never to fall in love again. "You're special," Cassandra said more than once, looking at Nicholas earnestly. "You make me feel good. You understand me, my soul. You are the best." Nicholas melted at these words and really felt unique. It was nice to realize that Cassandra, who always attracted male gazes wherever she appeared, was so devoted to him. A beautiful rebel, she had many acquaintances. It seemed that the whole city her friends, but she didn't get close to anyone. To hang out, to go somewhere together, it's please. But she only opened her soul to Nicholas. Cassandra was no longer in touch with her parents, and they always wanted to mold her into something else, to remake her, to make her into someone she wasn't. "What can I say?" she sighed sadly. "They wanted a son, and that's probably why they didn't like everything about me." Cassandra laughed too loudly and too loudly, talked too much and too fast. She was friends with the wrong people, didn't study hard enough, acted defiant. In general, the girl was picked on for every reason and no reason at all. That's why she decided to run away from home as early as possible, enter the university, and go to the city. The specialty for her daughter was chosen by her father. He decided that she must become a lawyer. Cassandra agreed. It was impossible to argue with a parent. And already in the city, breaking free from the total control of her mother and father, the girl finally decided to be herself, which she never regretted. They, when they learned that I was expelled from the university, wanted to bring me back and bring me up again. But I imagined it. No way. I went against my father's will, and he said that in that case I was no longer their daughter and could no longer count on their help. "Live, as you like," that's what he told me. And that's what I wanted. So I live as I know how and have no regrets. Nicholas marveled at Cassandra's stories. She was a year younger than he was. She had already experienced so much in her life, seen so much. As time passed, Cassandra and her endless parties began to bore Nicholas. Sometimes he wanted to spend the evening at home in front of the television, but the girl dragged him outside again and again. Then she was irresistibly drawn to a bar. Then she offered to jump into the river right off the bridge on the city embankment, or just walk around the city at night. The girl's adventurism, so attractive earlier, turned for Nicholas into her significant disadvantage. To live, never knowing what to expect from this reckless girl. Once it had thrilled and delighted him, now it irritated him. Cassandra loved Nicholas. The boy felt it, understood it, and assumed, of course, that parting with her would not be easy. But what followed next, he couldn't even imagine such a thing. Nicholas became more and more convinced that it was time to part with Cassandra. She'd been living in his flat for almost a year now. Her things were everywhere. Nicholas had no idea what it would be like for her to move out. She's packing her bags and going nowhere. It's a hard moment. He'd never asked a girl to move in with him before, or really been with anyone for that long. And he didn't know how to deal with the situation. Cassandra noticed something was wrong between them. "What's wrong with you?" "Me? What's going on between us?" she questioned. Nicholas kept silent, sometimes sighing sadly, preparing the ground. Let Cassandra figure out for herself what was going on. Maybe there would be no need to explain. And yet there was an explanation. It was on a December evening. Nicholas came home from university tired and angry. He was about to graduate. He had an uncooperative supervisor. This man flatly refused to take money and demanded serious work on the diploma. Nicholas was already physically unable to manage by the required date. And then there was Cassandra with her eternal carefree smile on her lips and untimely proposals. "What are you worried about?" "It's just a diploma," she shrugged her elegant shoulders. "People live without a diploma." And then Nicholas couldn't take it any longer. The resentment that had been building up for months came out. He shouted at Cassandra, called her selfish and empty, who lived at the expense of others and did not think about the future. There was so much pain and horror in the girl's eyes as she listened to this. "I'm sorry, I'll be what you want me to be," she said quietly as Nicholas finished his angry tirade. The boy was taken aback. This girl had fought for so long for the right to be herself and behave the way she wanted. And now, all of a sudden, this. Cassandra had said she was ready to remake herself to please him. But it's too late. "Cassandra, I'm sorry I yelled at you," Nicholas said, pulling himself together. "But we have to break up. I've wanted to tell you for a long time. I've been hesitant. Now it's just come to me somehow." "No," the girl exclaimed. She sounded desperate. She wasn't going to give up. "No, no, no." Cassandra threw the vase off the table. It hit the tiles on the floor and shattered into 1,000 small pieces. You can't do this. You can't drive me away. You can't push me away. We're adults. I love you more than anyone in this world. Don't you understand?" Nicholas looked at Cassandra, who was hysterical, and realized more and more clearly that she was really crazy. It had seemed so attractive and mysterious before. Now it was repulsive, frightening, pathetic, and unpleasant. "Go away," Nicholas said, standing with his back to the door. He tried to dodge her embrace. Cassandra clung to him like a drowning man clutching at straws. He managed then to shoo her out the door. Where will she go? Nicholas wasn't particularly worried about that. Cassandra had many acquaintances in the city and admirers too, who would gladly take her in. She wouldn't go to waste. Nicholas packed Cassandra's things into 2 large bags that evening. Cruel, of course. But he didn't have to put up with a crazy person around him if he'd been stupid enough to bring her into his home. One of Cassandra's friends took those things later. She contacted Nicholas herself. "How is she?" the guy asked, more out of politeness. By all the rules of social protocol, he had to ask that question. "She cries all the time. She doesn't want anything," she said sadly. Nicholas nodded. He hoped that Cassandra would soon be comforted and meet a new love. It had happened more than once in her life. A matter of routine for her, but Cassandra was not comforted. Moreover, she began to pursue Nicholas with her usual obsession. One day Cassandra showed up at the university dressed like a nun, a mournful look, a floor-length skirt, and a headscarf over her beautiful hair. "I'm changing for you," she said quietly, looking at Nicholas. "You see, I'm trying hard. I am different now, submissive, obedient. I will do whatever you tell me to do." It wasn't just frightening. It cost Nicholas a lot of trouble to get her out then. It was more than that. Confessions of love and pleas for forgiveness began to appear on the walls of the entrance to Nicholas's flat. Cassandra also flooded the guy with emails and paper letters. Some of them were even written in verse. Wherever Nicholas went, he would bump into her, whether it was a shopping center, a cafe, a bar, or just a park. Cassandra stalked him, begged for his attention, even threatened him. Nicholas didn't know where to get away from her. Persuasion didn't work. Cassandra didn't listen to him. She kept pushing her line, and it was frightening. One day she attacked him. Nicholas had just finished his degree. He was on his way home from a celebration of this long-awaited event. It was very late, not a soul in the street. Nicholas got out of the taxi and paid the driver. In a complacent mood, he headed for his driveway. Cassandra came at him like a fury, dressed in all black and therefore indistinguishable against the night landscape. "If you don't want to be with me, then no one else will have you," she shouted and attacked Nicholas. He, from surprise, did not even immediately begin to resist. The girl at that moment possessed some truly inhuman strength. But she did not take into account the main thing: he was still a man, and therefore physically stronger. Nicholas, of course, managed to push the attacker away from him. Cassandra fell to the pavement, hitting her back hard. "What are you doing?" Nicholas exclaimed. "You're out of your mind. Get better." "I'm sorry," Cassandra whispered. Large tears ran down her cheeks. "I don't know what came over me. I love you. How could I?" Nicholas disappeared down the driveway, slamming the door loudly. His heart was troubled now. Cassandra had made a mistake today. This attempt was doomed to failure beforehand. What if next time she threw a knife at him? Girls are capable of terrible things. Nicholas was in an unenviable position. The very next day he received a phone call from Cassandra's friend, who had picked up her things and told him in a broken voice that Cassie had tried to kill herself. The girl had failed. The rope broke at the last moment. She was spotted in time. The ambulance arrived very quickly, but now Cassandra is in intensive care. Nicholas didn't know what to do. He felt guilty about what had happened to this girl. On the other hand, the guy was still afraid of her horrible, unpleasant feelings. Everything ended happily for Nicholas. Cassandra survived, but she was diagnosed with an illness that developed due to extreme stress. The guy preferred not to think about what exactly was the cause of that very stress. Cassie was sent to a closed clinic. From mutual friends, Nicholas learned that her parents now visit her. Apparently, they realized that they needed their dysfunctional daughter. Friends also sometimes went to Cassandra in the hospital, but Nicholas never met her again. And in general, he really wanted to forget the whole heavy story. But he couldn't. That was probably the first time he thought about the fact that he wasn't acting right with girls. For him, they were just things beautiful and valuable, but things. How many women's tears were shed because of him? He never considered the feelings of his girlfriends. They, many of them, loved him so sincerely. Nicholas had become much more careful since then. Now he listened more carefully to the girls, noticed a lot of things, tried to be more sensitive and alert. And he always kept a safe distance. Easy, not burdensome romances, pre-agreed terms. No romance, but no surprises. He'd had enough of Cassandra. Nicholas graduated from university. His father got him a good position at the local city forming enterprise, a gas plant. The salary was more than decent. The career prospects are impressive. Nicholas plunged into work. He was an unimportant student, but he turned out to be a great employee. The guy delved into all the nuances, engaged in self-education, looked at more experienced colleagues. As for his personal life, Nicholas has not yet thought about any serious relationships. He actively tried to match girls from decent families. But Nicholas was adamant. He did not want to get married, and even less children. It seemed that he had not yet gained enough experience. He lived in his own pleasure, and he did not need unnecessary problems. The story of Cassandra was still fresh in his mind. A superficial relationship where everyone understood everything from the start. Romances without prospects, arising only for easy and pleasant pastime. It suited Nicholas just fine. It went on like this for several years. Nicholas had established himself in his profession. Now he was in good standing in his company. He was respected. The young specialist was promoted up the career ladder, and this was already the result of his merits, and not a consequence of the troubles of an authoritative father. By the way, his parents were very proud of their son. They did not think that he would be good. He behaved in his youth like a typical major. The son of rich daddy did not study, lived life, thoughtlessly spent money. His mom and dad couldn't get through to him at the time. And then suddenly Nicholas seemed to grow up and took up the mind. His parents were happy about it. And for complete happiness, they lacked only one thing: that the son married, had a family, gave them grandchildren. However, Nicholas was still very young, so his mother and father did not insist. And then Bridget came into Nicholas's life. Bridget came to the office on business. She was an economist for a partnership organization, and there were some accounting issues, so Bridget was sent to look into it. Nicholas bumped into her at the entrance. He was in a hurry to get to the car park. He'd been called into the office, and there she was, Bridget. This girl wasn't Nicholas' type at all. She was pretty, but she wasn't a model. Short, very thin, short haircut. Careful gray eyes, freckles on her nose, thin lips. In some ways, she reminded him of an elf from a fairy tale. Nicholas, not knowing why he stopped. Looking at the visitor, she absent-mindedly glanced at him and hurried on. In her hands, the girl clutched a folder with documents, and Nicholas, though in a hurry, followed her. On his own, not yet aware of his actions, just on a hunch. He did not go in vain. On the third floor, the elf girl stopped and began to look around confusedly. She was clearly lost. No wonder their office was a labyrinth. The intricacy of stairs, corridors confuses newcomers. Did you lose something? Nicholas turned to the girl with a smile. He was glad to be able to talk to her on such a plausible pretext. Yes, the beautiful stranger smiled back. I need to go to the accounting department, and I'm kind of lost. I'd be happy to walk you out. Nicholas deliberately led her the longest way. On the way, they got to know each other talking. Bridget talked easily and casually, as if she'd known Nicholas for years, a manner that appealed to him. He didn't want to leave her. When the door of the accounting office loomed on the horizon, "Well, here we are," Nicholas said with a slight disappointment in his voice. "To be honest, I don't want to let you go in there." "Why are the female employees there so angry?" Bridget joked. "It's not that. It's just that I have to leave right now. And when I get back, he'll be gone. And I don't want to break up now and never see you again, you know." "I understand," she nodded, and then added, "I feel the same way." After these words, Nicholas felt as if a warm wave had swept over him. His soul became light and easy. The world around him shone with bright colors. She likes him too. It's a real happiness. Nicholas suddenly wanted to hug her tightly and spin round the corridor, but it was probably too early for such a hug. "That's nice to hear," Nicholas said in a low-key voice, but his shining eyes no doubt conveyed the joy he felt at her words. Nicholas asked for Bridget's phone, and she handed him her mobile phone. The boy quickly dialed his number from it and made a call. "There," he smiled at the girl. "Now we're in touch. I will definitely call you." "I'll be waiting," the girl replied seriously. And he made the call. Of course, he called the same day. As soon as he returned from the department, he reported to the general. There were still a few hours left before the end of the working day. Bridget finished a little later than Nicholas. They'd arranged for the guy to pick her up at work tonight. So he did. He arrived a little before the agreed time and sat in the car for a long time, looking carefully at the porch of the office building. People were coming out of the doors, one by one and in groups, but Bridget was not among them. And then she appeared. Nicholas jumped out of the car and rushed to meet her. At first they sat in the cafe for a while, getting to know each other better, telling each other important things about themselves. Bridget lived with her mother in a small flat in the new buildings. She had graduated in economics from the local university. Nicholas was also studying there. Perhaps if he had attended classes more often, he would have met Bridget earlier, but it's unlikely he would have been interested in her then. The guy at that time attracted only girls with modeling looks, and not so long ago it was the same. Nicholas himself now did not understand why he was so struck by Bridget. Outwardly, it was absolutely not his type, but it was incredibly pleasant and easy to communicate with her. He and Bridget were very different. Nicholas confidently went through life, liked noisy companies, was not afraid to tell people the truth to their faces, even if it offended them. He did not like to understand the feelings of others and was characterized by straightforwardness. Bridget, on the other hand, was very delicate. She was afraid of hurting others and very sensitive to changes in people's moods. Calm, peaceful, serious, hardworking, and incredibly responsible. A little bit fearful, but at the same time capable of doing a lot for the sake of achieving her goals. Nicholas and Bridget. They seemed to complement each other, like two halves of one whole. They so different were drawn to each other with an irresistible force. They didn't want to be apart at all, so they walked late into the night, just holding hands, and sat snuggled together in the car. Bridget loved museums and exhibitions. She also liked leisurely walks, intimate conversations, trips out of town to places where you can quietly admire nature. Nicholas, however, showed her a different world. He dragged Bridget to rock concerts, invited her to his noisy, cheerful company. Bridget was also very interested in all this. Nicholas knew for sure that she was not lying, not trying to pretend joy to please him. For one thing, they had had complete sincerity with each other from the beginning. Therefore, Bridget would not hide her feelings. Secondly, Nicholas could see her eyes. There was admiration, delight, and interest in them. Nicholas felt happy to be with her and thanked fate that he had bumped into Bridget at the door and did not pass by. The boy met Bridget's mother. She turned out to be a pleasant woman, the same age as his parents. She made incredibly fragrant tea from some country herbs and baked mind-boggling cakes. Bridget kept complaining that she couldn't do it, but Nicholas was ready to forgive her inability to cook and not adapted to housekeeping. And her shyness made him fond of her. Nicholas did not know how to suggest that Bridget come to live with him. After Cassandra, he'd never invited anyone to live with him. Of course, the logical thing to do would be to ask Bridget to marry him. They'd been dating for almost a year. Both of them were of a suitable age for marriage. But Nicholas was still hesitant. He was afraid to take such an important step. There were many reasons for this. From an early age, his parents had warned their son against a rash marriage. "You are a prominent guy, a wealthy groom, more than enviable," instructed the heir mother. "You will be surrounded by girls who want to marry for profit. They will marry a rich guy first, then divorce him and legally claim his money and property. Do you know how many such stories there are? Be careful." It wasn't that Nicholas suspected Bridget of being self-serving. No, he'd never thought of her that way. But the idea that marriage is an incredibly responsible and deliberate decision. And it shouldn't be rushed. And what's the rush, really? They're both still young enough. It is necessary to live in their own pleasure, have fun, travel. And the wedding, the stamp and the passport and other conventions, it can wait. Besides, Nicholas still didn't want to deprive himself of a way out. Yes, he and Bridget were perfect now, but who knew what would happen next? No, Nicholas loved Bridget, and he was well aware of that. He'd never felt this strongly about anyone before. But who knew what lay ahead? His history with Cassandra had made him very cautious. Besides, marriage presupposes the birth of children. And Nicholas wasn't exactly ready for that. Taking on that kind of responsibility? Oh no, he hadn't had his fill yet. There's so much more interesting in life, and without these nappies and cradles. Nicholas had the example of his married friends in front of him. With the arrival of children, relations between young spouses changed, and most often not for the better. Newly married parents were tired. All their time devoted only to the kids, began to accuse each other on domestic issues and quarrel over the distribution of household chores. It was as if they stopped living for themselves. Such people talked only about children who went when, what talents have, what prams are better to choose, and so on. These conversations made Nicholas terribly sad. No, he was not yet ready for fatherhood. He wanted to live for himself and enjoy his youth without devoting all his time to crying babies. Someday later, in the distant future, Nicholas saw himself as a father, but certainly not in the next 5 to 7 years. Anyway, while Nicholas was pondering how to suggest that Bridget move in with him, skirting the issue of marriage, she herself brought up the subject of living together. Nicholas felt like a complete fool, having pondered the subject so much, made plans, and agonized over the doubts. All that was required was to talk frankly with Bridget, as usual. "I know I shouldn't be saying this, but I would love to fall asleep and wake up in your arms. And you'd make it easier for me to get to work," Bridget said. Nicholas glowed. It was an easy solution to a question he'd been pondering for a long time. It was as if Bridget had read his mind. Or perhaps she had. Now they were apart only when they were working. Nicholas and Bridget lived together as a family. At first, of course, there was an adjustment phase. Bridget was not at all self-sufficient in the home. Well, that's understandable, she lived with her mother. Nicholas taught her a lot of things, cooking, quickly tidying up her rooms. It was fun and very sweet. It seemed to bring Bridget and Nicholas even closer together. Bridget proved to be a capable student who quickly surpassed her teacher. She loved cooking complex, unusual dishes. "Maybe it's time for you to change careers," jokingly suggested Nicholas, tasting another gastronomic masterpiece of the girl. Such talents cannot be hidden from a wide audience. "Maybe I will change my profession," Bridget replied, almost seriously. "But not now. When I have free time, I'll open my own restaurant. That would be great." Over time, Bridget and Nicholas's friends got to know each other and joined forces. They made a very good group. The young people liked to go out together to the forest, to the river, to a tourist trip. And sometimes they gathered at someone's house and played board games. Nicholas had never imagined that it was so exciting and fun. He thought board games were only for children, but no. One of Bridget's friends, Margaret, always looked at Nicholas in a special way. It confused him a little. "Is this your Margaret? Is she all right with me?" Nicholas ventured to ask Bridget one day. "It's all right," she smiled. "It's just that you look incredibly similar to a guy Margaret was once very much in love with." There's such an ugly story there. Margaret followed him around, practically begging for attention, but he just laughed and ostentatiously dated other girls. He had a right, of course. He didn't have to have an affair with her, even if she was head over heels in love with him. But he was too cruel and ugly with her. And Margaret continued to love him and suffer. Yeah, drama. Well, we were very young then, just out of high school. You can forgive stupidity when you're young. I never even met him. Margaret only told me about this bloke. And then the other day she told me that you look just like him. It's such a strange coincidence. How did that story end? Oh, it didn't end much. The bloke went off to New York to find happiness, taking his next fling with him. Margaret suffered, looking for him on social media. Then somehow she let it go. At least she started paying attention to other guys. It was like the story was forgotten. And then suddenly I have you. And what, I look so much like him? Nicholas asked. Very much, Bridget answered. He was handsome too, according to Margaret. But the resemblance is only superficial. You're a kind, sensitive, deep person, and he's an egoist, a superficial empty shell. I can't believe Margaret didn't see it at first. She's not a shallow girl. Nicholas sighed. Bridget had not known him in his youth, and he was no better than Margaret's lover. He'd also spared no one else's feelings and manipulated girls. Cassandra came to mind again. Where is she now? What's wrong with her? Nicholas shook his head, pushing the unpleasant thoughts away. Nicholas and Bridget lived soul to soul, walking, traveling, meeting friends, shopping together as a married couple, supporting each other in all situations, taking care of each other. With all this, Nicholas felt free. Bridget was comfortable with the fact that sometimes he went out with his friends. She could just as well spend the evening with her friends in a bar or club, and Nicholas wasn't jealous at all. He was sure that Bridget would not do anything wrong, would not betray him. And so it went on for several years. Nicholas and Bridget sometimes thought about the future. Bridget dreamed of having children. She already wanted to be a mother. Nicholas saw this, but he was not yet ready for parenthood. I have a lot to do before I have a baby, he reasoned. Both in terms of career and in general, I dreamed to go on tour in Africa, to learn to fly an aeroplane, to open my own business. All this will be problematic. With children on my hands, I still have unrealized dreams and unfulfilled plans, so I'm not ready for children yet. That's a shame, Bridget sighed. I've wanted a baby for a long time, a baby you and me. But if you're not ready, I'll wait. I want this child to be a joy for both of us. I won't take any other option, Bridget said. Nicholas was glad that she understood and accepted his decision. He was willing to do a lot of things for her, but not a child. At least not yet. But fate, as it usually happens, had its own way. One day, Bridget gave Nicholas news that turned his happy and carefree life upside down. Nicholas, we need to have a serious talk. Is something wrong? She said. Nicholas felt a slight unease. Bridget looked too confused and pale. Perhaps she was seriously ill. What's wrong? He asked. I don't know how to tell you, Bridget answered. Nicholas suddenly thought she was leaving him. Fear squeezed his heart with an icy hand. Not this, he wasn't ready to lose Bridget, but what if she's met someone else? Speak plainly, sincerely, as always. It's hard for me to talk about this. I know how you feel about it. Anyway, I'm expecting a baby. What? Nicholas was hit over the head with a sandbag. The news had a profound effect on him. He felt a slow wave of panic coming over him. Parenthood was scaring him. I don't know how it happened. I mean, we were using protection. But it happens. I've already been to the doctor, and he said there's no one way to be sure. So, Bridget, you know I can't be a father right now, don't you? Nicholas said softly, looking her in the eye. I'm starting to develop my business, and I have a long business trip coming up. And anyway, there are so many plans not yet realized. It's no time for a baby. No time at all. Bridget lowered her eyes. I know. But this baby, it's already here, you know. They even let me hear its heartbeat. It's such a miracle. I know how much you want it, but I can't, Nicholas replied. You don't have to be afraid, Bridget took his hands and looked into his eyes. Everything will be fine. Just think, we have everything to make this baby happy. The flat, the job, the money, it's all there, Bridget said. Lots of people give birth in much more cramped conditions and still manage. We'll be happy too. There's no need to be afraid, we're together. Nicholas shook his head. The image of his friend, who had recently become a father, suddenly appeared before his eyes. Mussed hair, stained t-shirt, sleep-deprived eyes, and a stupid, meaningless smile on his face. No, Nicholas didn't want to become like that. Then he started insisting on terminating the pregnancy. It was hard to say even the word himself, looking Bridget in the eyes. But what could be done? It was about his freedom and peace of mind. Besides, it wasn't like he'd given up on the idea of having a baby altogether. No, of course not. He and Bridget would have children someday. But not now. Definitely not now. How could she not understand? They've talked about it so many times, and they've all agreed to take it slow. Do you even realize what you're offering me? There was steel in Bridget's voice. It was hard for her too. I do. But it happens. Medicine is so advanced these days. You're still young, so it'll be quick and painless. And there will be no consequences, Nicholas replied. He realized that he was saying very scary words, but he could not do otherwise. And he had a say in the matter too, because the baby would change his world completely. Bridget must reckon with him. And she was looking at him like a complete stranger. There was pain and disappointment and disbelief in her eyes. You scare me, Bridget said. You scare me so much. You should know how you scare me. Nicholas suddenly remembered his mother's old words, her warnings about cunning girls who get pregnant and marry wealthy men, and then string them along. You just want me to marry you. Are you like everyone else? He said. Without another word, Bridget turned round and sprinted out of the flat. She only had time to grab her car keys. Nicholas immediately realized that he'd said too much. Of course, Bridget wasn't like that. He shouldn't have hurt her. On the other hand, she should realize that there would be no baby. Nicholas was too young to be a father, and he'd told her that many times. And she'd either lukewarmly agreed or just pretended to agree. Nicholas jumped out onto the balcony. He was about to call Bridget back. They will discuss everything calmly and come to the conclusion that there is no hurry. Nicholas will even apologize for his harsh words. He really loves Bridget. She's the closest thing he has to family, no matter what. But Bridget didn't even turn round at his shout, offended. She got into the car, slammed the door loudly, and sped away. Nothing, Nicholas muttered under his breath. She'll cool down, weigh the pros and cons, and come back. You can't be without me. And I know you love me, and I love you, and we'll still be together. Nicholas took a bottle of cognac from the bar and opened it. He needed to relax now. The strong drink made everything that was happening not so scary. The world became simpler and clearer for a while. Nicholas texted Bridget a conciliatory text. He apologized for his harsh words, confessed his love, and called for negotiations. The guy was probably even willing to discuss the baby issue, since it was so important to Bridget. He would probably make that sacrifice. After all, it's unlikely he'll ever meet a more suitable girl than her. He can't be without her, no matter what. Nicholas was even now sorely lacking his soulmate. Yes, things hadn't gone according to plan, which was why he was scared. The news just confused him. But he pondered, weighed, and planned anyway. He and Bridget would be fine, just as long as she would move away sooner and forgive him for his cruel words. Nicholas dialed her number several times. That night, the girl didn't answer. It was understandable she was offended, maybe even crying. Nicholas cringed. It was unbearable to realize himself in the role of torturer of the person he loved. He wanted to give Bridget joy, to make her smile, to make her happy. But as it happened, he was the cause of her tears. Nicholas knew how to remedy the situation. He spent the whole evening thinking about his situation and accepted Bridget's decision, accepted her point of view. Yes, Nicholas would do anything to make his beloved happy, no matter what it cost him. Now, as Bridget drifted away from him in her car to an unknown destination, Nicholas realized clearly that he needed her. Needed her badly, vitally needed her. He wished she'd cool down and take his call. That night, Nicholas couldn't sleep. Bridget never showed up. She didn't answer his messages or his calls. She was hurt. For the first time in her life, she was so offended she didn't even want to hear from him. Nicholas was watching a show on TV and absent-mindedly flipping through the city news feed on his phone. Suddenly, he saw a report about an accident on the motorway that had happened recently. There were photos from the scene. Nicholas looked at Bridget's wrecked car with horror. He himself gave this car to his beloved when she passed the license. It was a little over a year ago. Bridget was very embarrassed then too expensive gift, but Nicholas was adamant and she had to give in. She loved the car so much, called it her swallow, and took it to the car wash far more often than necessary. Nicholas was still hoping for a mistake. There aren't many white cars like this in the city. But the ballerina cat suspension on the broken windshield. Nicholas bought it in Chicago, where he'd recently been sent on a business trip. Chances are slim that anyone else in their city has one. It's Bridget's car. Nicholas frantically searched for information about the accident. There wasn't much information yet. It seemed that the driver had lost control and hit a road barrier at high speed. Bridget was always careful behind the wheel. Nicholas even laughed at her slowness. It was unlikely that she would speed up on the motorway. It wasn't like her at all. Except that Bridget had been in a terrible state when she'd run away from him the day before. Why didn't he think to stop her? Grab her hand, hold her close, apologize, never let her go. The driver was hospitalized in a regional hospital in serious condition, Nicholas read under the terrible photo. In serious condition, but alive. Nicholas was already calling a taxi to go to the regional hospital. It was late at night. The sleepy girl at the reception desk asked who Nicholas was to the victim. On hearing that he was her flatmate, what an unpleasant word. The nurse said with a tinge of regret in her voice that in that case she had no right to divulge information about the patient. That's if you were married. Nicholas grinned bitterly. He wasn't going to leave the walls of the hospital. He kept walking around, trying to look in the windows until a guard chased him away. But the boy didn't give up. He went again to the lobby of the clinic, determined to find out something about Bridget's condition. That's where he ran into her mother. They rushed over to each other, hugged. The woman looked confused, frightened, and crying, which was not surprising, really. She knew nothing about her daughter's quarrel with Nicholas, had no idea about it. Otherwise, she probably wouldn't have spoken to him. It's all my fault, isn't it? I'm the one to blame for what happened, Nicholas thought. How is Bridget? They won't tell me anything, Nicholas asked. In intensive care, Bridget's mother sobbed. She's undergoing surgery right now. Her condition is critical. The doctor says there's not much hope. Did you know Bridget was expecting a baby? Nicholas nodded. Well, the baby, of course, was not saved, the woman continued. The doctors are fighting for her life. I wonder how happy you would have been if you hadn't had that accident, if you were expecting a baby. I would have been happy for you. Nicholas nodded at Bridget's mother's words, not noticing the tears running down his cheeks. Bridget's mother signed some papers, and Nicholas was allowed to see the girl in the intensive care unit, only for a short time. He sat next to the seemingly sleeping Bridget, entangled in wires, holding her hand and talking. He apologized, begged her to wake up, promised that as soon as she came to her senses, they would marry and start planning children. Painting pictures of a beautiful future together in the hope that these prospects would make Bridget come round. After all, she had something to come back for. Happiness was so close. Why didn't I realize it at once? Nicholas chastised himself. How could I have spoken so harshly to the person I loved? It was unbearable to realize that Bridget was in this state because of him. After all, that was why she'd driven at breakneck speed down the motorway, just because of their stupid argument. Usually Bridget drove very carefully, but here, no one knew it was Nicholas's fault, but that didn't make him feel any better. His only wish was that Bridget would wake up after the terrible accident. She would never be the same again, but it didn't matter. Nicholas would be there for her. He would be her arms and legs if he had to, just to see her favorite eyes and hear her voice again. But the miracle didn't happen. Bridget never recovered. One night she was gone. There was nothing the doctors could do. Nicholas didn't want anything. He forgot to eat, stopped going to work, didn't answer his friends' calls. Life went black, lost all meaning. And then there was the guilt. It sometimes overwhelmed Nicholas to the point where he couldn't breathe. He even thought about ending his suffering all at once. Why should he live? Nothing good would ever happen again, because nothing would ever bring Bridget back to him. And he didn't deserve to be happy. Wasn't it because of his stupid fear that his beloved wasn't alive? Not alive at all. She loved life so much, she dreamed of that baby. Parents hired a famous doctor for Nicholas, but he could not help the guy. He said some general phrases, tried to be clever. But this man, he didn't know the whole truth. Nicholas could not tell anyone about his guilt. It was too hard, too scary. Then one day Nicholas met Margaret, Bridget's friend, by chance as he was walking home from the shop. Now he only went as far as the nearest liquor shop and straight home. The booze was at least a little mind-numbing and distracting. Margaret looked at Nicholas with sympathy and regret. She herself had suffered the loss of her best friend. She and Bridget had been very close. But after hearing Nicholas' condition, Margaret had come to support him. Amazing man. The guy didn't mind her company and invited the girl to his place. They sat at the table. "Remember Bridget?" cried. And Nicholas suddenly decided to revelations. He told Margaret the truth. Told her all about his nightmarish behavior before the fatal accident. "So it's all my fault," the boy concluded. He thought Margaret would start insulting and berating him. It would have been natural and fair, but she took pity on him. It's unbelievable. "It's not your fault," she said. "It's just the way things are." Margaret stroked Nicholas's head as if he were a baby. It made him feel better. "You were just scared." And Bridget? She was scared and confused too. "You didn't want this, did you?" Neither did she. It rained that day, the road was slippery. "It wasn't your fault. It was a coincidence," Margaret said. She'd helped Nicholas better than an expensive counselor. They called each other now, sometimes talking, and these conversations had a soul-saving effect on Nicholas. The guy came round, went back to work. Gradually, he climbed out of the deep black hole in which he spent a long time. Parents rejoiced. Colleagues and friends noted that Nicholas was becoming the same. They were all wrong. Nicholas knew for sure that now he would never be the same again. It had been many years since that terrible day. He was still counting down the age of his and Bridget's baby boy. If he'd been born in time, he'd be 14 by now. Seeing boys his son's age on the street, the man couldn't help but wonder what his child would have been like. Now these memories came back again. There was no escape from them. Of course, that acute pain, as in the first time after the tragedy, is no longer there. But the longing and sadness of the unfulfilled is now forever with Nicholas. Has he come to terms with it? Nicholas had not met a woman remotely resembling Bridget, as he had hoped. There was probably no such woman in the world, and he wouldn't settle for anything less. Especially after he'd known true love. The kind that only comes once in a lifetime. And some people probably never have it at all. Nicholas was about to get out of the car to go to the supermarket, when suddenly a little boy of 3 years old caught his attention. A tiny boy in a shirt, obviously off someone else's shoulder, was scurrying around the rubbish bins. The child stood on top of the bins, otherwise he couldn't reach the edge of the bin. With his little hands, he busily picked through the leftover food in the bin. There was a restaurant in the mall, so there was often food in the bin. All the homeless people in the area knew this, so you could often spot people hunting for scraps near the bins. Most of the time it was adults or teenagers, but this one was just a baby. They shouldn't be out on the street without a parent. Maybe his mother or father was around. Nicholas looked around. No, there were no adults around. The boy was walking on his own, and judging by his confident and businesslike movements, this was not the first time this had happened to him. Strange and very suspicious. Nicholas couldn't leave this child unattended any longer. There was no telling what could happen to such a baby. If he falls into a rubbish bin, he won't be able to get out. And then there are big stray dogs, bad people, fast cars. There's a lot of dangers for a kid on the street. Maybe we should call the police. Let them deal with it, he thought, but immediately discarded the idea. What if that call would somehow harm the child? One had to be careful in such matters. The baby, meanwhile, had finished his business in the rubbish bin. Grabbing a bag of leftovers, he awkwardly climbed down from the crates and headed somewhere, chewing on a crust of bread. Nicholas's heart snapped with pity. Such a small child walking clumsily, but already he had to fend for himself. It was not from a good life that the child went into the rubbish bins. Nicholas couldn't let the situation go unnoticed. He slipped out of the car and followed the child. The boy headed confidently towards the road. Adults hurried past without noticing the little man. Only occasionally someone threw a surprised look at the boy and went on. Such indifference was astonishing. A small child is all alone in the street, and no one cares. However, perhaps they thought that the kid was following one of the adults. The boy turned down a narrow alley. Nicholas followed him for another couple of 100 meters, and the child found himself in the private sector. He had never been in this place before. Wow, almost the center of the city. Only 100 meters away from here was the main street with a well-kept square, luxurious fountains, and wide pavement. And here is poverty, desolation, dust, rubbish. The boy approached the old gate. Behind the fence he could see a garden overgrown with weeds, in the back of which there was a long, unpainted house with shabby roofs. The boy pushed open the old door and slipped through the gap. Nicholas watched outside to see what would happen next. Are the adults here waiting for the baby? And why would they let such a babe go alone? The boy ran into the porch and disappeared behind the ajar front door. Nicholas stood for a moment in indecision. The child was home. Nothing had happened to him. It would be safe to go back. Think of it as seeing the kid off, making sure he didn't get in trouble. That's it. But Nicholas' heart was still restless. He felt sorry for the boy. The unknown was frightening. What if the child is not well? What if he's in danger? So Nicholas knocked on the gate. He couldn't find a bell, so he had to use force. A minute later, an old man appeared on the porch. He was thin, short, in knee-high sweatpants and a stale t-shirt, overgrown with stubble, with a swollen face of an unhealthy red hue. Swollen eyes, a cloudy look, everything is clear. This man is either drunk or hungover. Are you here to see me? The grandfather asked in a hoarse voice. I'm here to see you, Nicholas confirmed. And what was the question? About the kid who just came home. He was out alone. The old man's voice was threatening. Did my ails do something again? No, Nicholas hastened to reassure. The gate was not locked at the entrance. The yard was a sort of dump, a mountain of rubbish and broken bricks. Beer cans and bottles of cheap liquor everywhere. And suddenly, in the midst of all this chaos, a makeshift sandbox. What do you want? Asked the old man, not very politely. I just thought you might need some help. A child alone on the street at that age. I caught him by the rubbish bins outside the shopping center. He was looking for food. How many times have I told Alex, don't go out there alone? He wouldn't listen. The kid was looking for food, Nicholas said. He was obviously very hungry. Who is he to you? What does he look like? Asked the old man. A grandson, he answered. My only grandson. And you are right, good man. He and I could really use some help. I can't work because of my age. Where are his parents? Nicholas asked, but the old man relaxed. I'd like to know that myself. Who is Alex's father? I don't know. My daughter Gwen herself was confused when she got pregnant young. And Gwen herself, the boy's mother, is off somewhere. I haven't heard from her in 3 months. And you didn't sound the alarm? Nicholas was surprised. If something has happened to my daughter, what can she do? The old man said with a wave of his hand. It's not the first time she's gone far away either. They say she's a fickle woman and doesn't know her mother. Gwen started drinking when she was 15, and then she went downhill. She had a baby, settled down a bit, and then she went off again. I can't understand how boring her life is, babysitting a baby. So I had my grandchild with me. It's safer with me. And Gwen. No hope for her. She would have killed her son long ago. Nicholas raised his eyebrows in surprise. If the child was better off with this obviously drunk man, what kind of mother was there? So there's nothing to worry about, the old man continued. If anything had happened, one of her friends would have told me by now. Here you say to sound the alarm, to look for the daughter. I'd have Alex taken away from me and put in an orphanage in a heartbeat. If they find out about his mom and him, he's already attached to me, and me to him. And will the boy be able to be there without me? Nicholas had very different thoughts on the subject. He thought the child would be much better off in an orphanage than in a broken-down house with a drunken grandfather. And they fed them well. Alex won't have to think about his own food, said the grandfather. Who's that? A boy jumped out on the porch. A little boy. He's funny. His black olive eyes scrutinized the intruder. Nicholas smiled at the little boy. He was so touching, so defenseless. The man realized that he couldn't just walk away and forget this child. He himself did not understand what was happening to him. Only Nicholas suddenly wanted to shelter the baby from all the troubles and misfortunes that fell on his shaggy head. It's a good uncle, explained the old man. He wants to help us. Are you hungry? Nicholas asked, trying to keep his voice as soft as possible. Alex shook his head in the negative. We have plenty of food at home. I brought it. Would you like to eat with us? Nicholas immediately went to the nearest shop and bought 2 bags of food for Alex and his grandfather. There was meat, fruit, and sweets for the baby, and cheap plastic toys from a street shop. They gave Alex a special thrill. Nicholas thought a lot about that chance encounter afterwards. Alex is in danger with relatives like that, but his grandfather is also right. In an orphanage, the little boy will be even worse off. Alex is so sensitive, vulnerable, touching. He needs love and attention. His grandfather loves him in his own way. The boy feels it. It will be very hard for him in the orphanage. Nicholas now often visited Alex, brought food, toys, and books. With pleasure he communicated, played with the boy, talked with his grandfather about life. The man could not leave the baby without supervision. Somehow, imperceptibly, this child became Nicholas, far from being a stranger. The boy's grandfather still drank alone or in the company of drinking buddies. These were seemingly peaceful, harmless people, not hooligans. They treated Alex with warmth and participation. No one offended the boy. Still, it was no good for a child to be in such a place. Alex's mother never showed up. She seemed to have forgotten about the existence of her son and father. Let him go for a walk. The old man waved his hand when Nicholas asked him about his daughter. If she doesn't show up, it means that everything is fine with her. She'll come straight back when she's in a tight spot. It's happened more than once. Nicholas tried to get Alex's granddad into hospital. Of course, he's a very old man, but what if the treatment will help, and the old man will stop drinking, will take up the upbringing of his grandson? Miracles happen. Not in this case. The grandfather flatly refused treatment and assured that he was fine. What's the big deal? There's a house, there's food in the fridge. Not everyone has such a rich life. Most of the country is as poor as Alex and me. Don't make a tragedy out of nothing. You're helping a boy from a poor family. Well, thank you very much. We need your contribution, but mind your own business. The old man couldn't accept that he was doing something wrong. In his worldview, this was the norm. Everyone lived like that. Nicholas continued to visit Alex and help the family with groceries. He himself did not understand why he suddenly became so attached to the boy. Perhaps he saw in him his unborn son. The boy was drawn to Nicholas. He loved him with all his soul. He even made some crafts for him. It was very sweet. Nicholas found himself looking forward to Friday all week. That was the day he'd visit Alex and his grandfather, and no business could distract him from his visit. The old man had Nicholas's phone number. He'd left it with him, just in case he needed help in a hurry. But the grandfather never bothered him, and now he called in the middle of the week. "We're in trouble," Grandpa said. "Alex is being taken away from me." Nicholas immediately rushed to the familiar house. He was very worried about Alex. Something might have happened to the boy. The old man hadn't really explained where they were taking him. Maybe to a hospital. But Alex turned out to be fine. He sat on his grandfather's lap and looked fearfully at the 2 women in police uniform. When he saw Nicholas, Alex burst into tears again, probably from relief this time. And there was so much hope in his dark eyes for his good uncle. "You promised," Nicholas stroked his head. Grandfather said that Uncle Nicholas would come and everything would be all right. What's the matter? Nicholas asked the police officers. We're trying to remove the child to give him to an institution, explained one of the women. And this man, who claims to be the boy's grandfather, just won't give him up. He makes the child nervous. The boy is afraid of us now. He's clinging to his grandfather and won't come to us, said another woman. Gwen is dead, the old man explained from his corner. Tears came to his eyes, but he forced them back. Turns out there was a fire in the garage with some mates a week ago. They were drinking there and listening to music in the car. And now to the orphanage, because I'm nobody to him by documents, and I won't give him away. You can't take him away from his own grandfather. So that's it. Alex is an orphan now. I don't think they'll leave him to his grandfather. He's not the right age, and he's not the right way of life. But you can't put him in an orphanage. He'd break down. He's a free, loving, curious kid who needs love and attention. It won't be easy for him in the orphanage. Can't we just leave it as it is? At least for the time being, Nicholas said. The fact is that the mother was not involved in the child's life. The boy didn't even know her. He was brought up by his grandfather. In this respect, nothing will change for Alex. He'll still live with him. I'll look after him. I promise to be here every day. We have a warrant, the older police officer shook her head. We have to take him away. Grandfather can try to get custody, but frankly, I don't think he'll be able to. What if I get custody? The words came out of Nicholas's mouth before he had time to think it through. It was only when he said the phrase that he realized he was really ready for that. He would love to be a father, loving, attentive, caring. I don't mind, the grandfather assured him, hugging his grandson. Alex and Nicholas will be fine. They love each other. I'll sign everything you need. Just don't take him to the orphanage. You? The policewoman was surprised. Can you do that? Sure. We can get temporary custody for you. It won't take long. If you want to take him permanently, you'll have to go through foster parent school, collect a lot of certificates, and you'll also need your spouse's consent. I'm not married. Well, then adoption is out of the question. The baby needs a full family. All right, let's get temporary custody, and we'll figure it out from there. We can do that. But the child needs to live somewhere other than here. It's not the right environment for the boy. I agree. Nicholas, using all his contacts, quickly got temporary custody of Alex. He moved the boy in with him. Alex's mouth dropped open in surprise when he saw the clean, spacious flat. The little boy had never been in such houses. Of course, he liked it here very much. But Nicholas needed a nanny for Alex. The man worked a lot. He could not devote all his time to the child. And then Nicholas thought of Margaret. Margaret was Bridget's friend, kind, sensitive, understanding. It was Margaret who had once helped Nicholas come to his senses, come back to life. They were still in touch. Sometimes they corresponded on social networks, congratulated each other on holidays. Nicholas knew that Margaret had recently divorced her husband, left him with a young daughter, Elizabeth, the same age as Alex. The woman had lost her job because of constant sick leave and was now earning some pennies. Nicholas repeatedly offered her to join him in the department, but Margaret refused. She had a daughter to take care of. The girl was growing up very sickly and did not go to kindergarten. What a job. But now Nicholas was ready to offer Margaret a wonderful option. She would become a nanny for Alex. Nicholas would pay her a good salary, and Margaret would be able to fulfill her professional duties without taking time away from her daughter. Everyone is good. Margaret has money and work, and her daughter is with her, and Alex is looked after. And children of the same age would probably have more fun together. Margaret gladly agreed to the proposal. Now she came to Nicholas's house every morning with her daughter, and he went to work with peace of mind, knowing that Alex was in good hands. It was some incredibly cozy and peaceful time. Nicholas now loved coming home. There he was greeted by a smiling Margaret and cheerful little ones. From the kitchen came the mind-blowing aromas of home-cooked food. On the desk were the children's drawings, clean, cozy, warm. They usually had dinner, all four of them. They talked, laughed, shared the news of the day. Nicholas, of course, did not forget about the old man, Alex's grandfather. Every weekend he and Alex visited him. The grandfather was happy for his grandson and was sincerely grateful to Nicholas. "You're lucky, grandson," he said, ruffling Alex's hair. "I don't know for what merits fate has sent us such a man." But a few months passed, and Nicholas got a call from the guardianship office to remind him that Alex would have to be returned to the orphanage. The temporary guardianship was coming to an end. Just thinking about it made Nicholas's heart grow cold. Alex, a trusting, funny little boy, would end up in a state-run home, unless Nicholas could think of something to adopt him. Nicholas has the conditions, the wealth is more than decent, but the child can only be placed with a full family. That means Nicholas needs to get married, to make a fake marriage, so that on paper everything was as it should be. All that was left was to find a bride. But who to turn to with such a strange request? It had to be someone Nicholas could trust. The answer came naturally. The perfect candidate was at Nicholas's house every day, Margaret. "We need to have a serious talk with you," he began. Nicholas outlined her situation, explained why he needed this stamp in his passport, and actually proposed. Margaret listened to Nicholas attentively, occasionally forgetting to breathe. The man looked at her, certain that she would refuse. Now he would finish, and Margaret would give him all the reasons why she could not go through with it, and she would be right. It was, after all, a very unusual case. "Nicholas, please tell me, do you not remember me at all?" Margaret said suddenly. It was a strange question. Nicholas looked at her in amazement. "How could I not remember you?" "Of course I remember you. Bridget introduced us." "What do you mean?" "No, we've known each other before." Margaret sighed. I knew you. You hardly noticed me. I followed you around at university, looking you in the eye, trying to get to know you. I was dying for love. You changed girls one after another. I thought you were laughing at my feelings. Then I realized you didn't even notice me at all. So it was you. Nicholas couldn't believe what he was hearing. Bridget told me that you'd had this unhappy love affair before. Only then the bloke went to New York, if I'm not mistaken. Well, that's what I told my friends when I realized I wanted to turn over a new leaf. Margaret nodded. They didn't know who this man was. I told them about you, but I never showed them. Wow, Nicholas said. It's so strange and unexpected. And now, many years later, you suddenly proposed to me. Margaret smiled. Not a real one, of course, but still. It's ironic. Did you really love me? How could I have ignored it? I did, she nodded. I've never felt that way about anyone since. It was for the best. They were too strong. Destructive. Even, but then Margaret continued. Then I was able to forget you, to fall out of love with you. I grew up. I realized that you were selfish and fickle, incapable of doing anything responsible or courageous. You're right. It was all me. Nicholas nodded. But not now. That man is gone. In front of me now is a kind, brave man, attentive, mature, and reliable. This man couldn't get past the misfortune of a small child. This man solves problems instead of running away from them. So? He joked. Did you fall in love with me again? He was still reeling from Margaret's sudden confession. Quite possibly, the woman smiled. Why not? Will you marry me then? The deserted shore, covered with soft white sand, the turquoise ocean. Calm waves, the red sun setting rapidly over the horizon. Seagulls soaring in the distance over the water surface, sparkling in the rays of the setting sun. A family is seated on the shore. A tanned man in blue bathing shorts is playing football with two children, a boy with intelligent black eyes and a charming girl. Shouts, laughter, and cheerful chatter. The mother of the family smilingly looks at the merry fiddling of her family from a comfortable sun lounger. In her hands she has a glass with a tropical cocktail, on her head a wide-brimmed hat. The woman looks rested and peaceful. The head of the family has finally had a holiday, so the four of them went to the ocean coast. The woman stood up and slowly approached the beach players, from under the feet of which clouds of sand soared. Nicholas, it's time for dinner for the kids. Well, they should go to bed early too. There's a field trip tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Remember? Of course, the man smiled. Then he came closer, put his arm around her waist and kissed her tenderly. Did you hear that, children? You must obey your mum. But we want to play some more, objected the little ones. Well, we'll play and make a shipwreck in the bathtub, Nicholas laughed. And then we'll compete to see who falls asleep the fastest. Yay! The children clapped their hands. You're a wonderful father. Margaret smiled. And your husband is the best in the world. How lucky I am to have you. Nicholas hugged his wife again. Then he picked up the children, his daughter on one arm, his son on the other, and the family headed towards the hotel.